Ethan Caldwell had buried a wife, built an empire, and learned to feel nothing. But the moment he heard that sound, that single broken breath seeping through a locked door in an empty trading post, something cracked open inside him that money had never been able to touch. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He only knew that whoever was on the other side of that door was dying. And he wasn't the kind of man who walked away. If this story already has your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, because this one is going to change you. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The trading post sat at the edge of nothing. That was the only honest way to describe it. A squat, weathered building hunched against the base of the Montana foothills, like it had given up trying to stand straight years ago. The sign above the door had long since lost two of its letters, and the porch boards sagged under the weight of too many winters and not enough care. Ethan Caldwell had been here a dozen times before. He knew old Silas Beaumont ran a tight, clean operation. Supplies restocked, regular fire kept burning door always open before sunup. So when Ethan rode up that August morning in 1882 and found the door hanging just barely off the latch, he knew something was wrong before his boots even touched the ground. He sat still on his horse for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to read the silence. And the silence said plenty. No smoke from the chimney. No smell of coffee. No sound of Silas moving around inside muttering to himself the way old men do when they think no one is listening. The horses tied at the post across the road were gone. The supply cart that was usually parked along the eastern wall, gone. Even the dog, a one-eared hound that slept under the porch every morning without fail, was nowhere to be found. Ethan climbed down slow. He tied his horse to the post with practiced hands, his eyes never leaving the door. His hand drifted toward the revolver at his hip, not drawing it, not yet, just letting his fingers rest there the way a man does when every instinct he has is telling him to be ready. He pushed the door open with two fingers. Inside was wrong in 100 small ways. A stool was knocked over near the counter. A tin of tobacco had rolled across the floor and come to rest against the far wall. One of the shelves behind the counter was pulled away from the wall at an angle, like someone had grabbed it to steady themselves or had been thrown into it. A coffee cup sat on the counter, still half full, the liquid long cold. Ethan stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under his weight. He let them. He wasn't trying to be quiet. If someone was hiding in this building meaning to do him harm, he'd rather they knew he was coming and stepped out to face him. The kind of men who hid in shadows and attacked from behind were exactly the kind of men Ethan Caldwell had learned to handle efficiently and without much sentiment. "Silas," he said. Not loud, steady, nothing. He moved around the counter, eyes sweeping every corner. The back shelf was in order. The custom rifle he'd ordered months ago was still there, wrapped in cloth, waiting exactly where Silas would have left it. That told him something. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been a robbery. A thief would have taken the rifle first. A fine custom piece like that could feed a man for 3 months in a territory where work came and went. He picked up the rifle, turned it over in his hands, just long enough to confirm it was his order, and set it down again. That's when he heard it. It was so faint that a man thinking about something else would have missed it entirely. Just the smallest shift in the air. A breath drawn in with effort. The sound a person makes when they are trying very hard to make no sound at all, and failing just barely because they are too exhausted to hold themselves together anymore. It came from the supply room at the back. The door was padlocked. Ethan stared at it. The lock was a heavy iron one. Silas kept it for nights when he was away to protect his inventory. But the lock was on the wrong side. The hasp had been flipped so the lock sat on the outside. Anyone in that room had been locked inside from without, not by their own choice. Ethan picked up the heavy wooden stool from the floor. He drove the leg into the padlock once hard. The bracket split from the wood of the door frame. He kicked the door open. The smell hit him first. Blood, dried sweat, fear. The kind of smell that has a color to it, a deep, ugly rust-brown color that you see even when your eyes haven't adjusted to the dark yet. "Hello," he said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Something moved in the corner behind a stack of crates. Ethan didn't move toward it right away. He understood without having to think about it that moving fast would be the wrong thing to do. He understood this the way a man understands things when he has lived long enough and paid enough attention to other people's fear. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I'm Ethan Caldwell. I came to pick up a rifle from Silas Beaumont. The door was open and Silas is gone. I heard you breathing." A pause. Then a sound. Not words. Just a small, exhausted sound, like someone letting out a breath they'd been holding for hours. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. Silence. Then barely above a whisper, "Anna." "All right, Anna." He kept his voice level. "The way you talk to a frightened animal that's been caught in a trap, not to diminish them, but to give them something steady to hold on to. I'm going to come a little closer so I can see if you're hurt. Is that all right?" Another pause. Then what might have been a small nod, or just the movement of her head falling forward slightly. He moved around the crates. What he found behind them stopped him completely for 3 full seconds. She was young mid-20s maybe. Dark hair badly tangled. Her dress was torn at one shoulder and stained down one side with blood that had dried to black. Her wrists had marks on them that told him she'd been bound and had fought against it hard enough to cut herself raw. Her right cheek was swollen. Her lip was split. And she was sitting with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up to her chest. And she was looking up at him with eyes that were simultaneously the most frightened eyes he had ever seen on a human being and the most defiant. She was not unconscious. She was not broken. She was sitting there bleeding and battered, holding herself together through sheer force of will, and the look in her eyes said that she had expected someone to open that door eventually, but she had not expected that someone to be who Ethan appeared to be, and she wasn't sure yet whether that was better or worse. "Who did this to you?" he said. Her jaw tightened. "Men who thought I'd be dead before anyone found me." "Well?" Ethan crouched down to her level. "They were wrong about that." "I'm aware," she said, and even with a split lip, even with blood dried on her collar, and her hands shaking slightly in her lap, there was something in her voice that was almost dry, almost wry. Like some part of her somewhere deep down still had enough of herself left to note the obvious. He almost said something. He stopped himself. Now was not the time. "Can you stand?" he asked instead. She tried. She got halfway up, braced against the wall, and her legs gave. Ethan caught her before she hit the crates. She made a sound, pain-sharp and involuntary, and then she went very still in his arms, not limp, not surrendering, just still, like she was deciding something. "I don't need," she started. "I know you don't need anything," he said quietly. "But I'm going to carry you to my horse anyway because we need to move and your legs aren't cooperating right now. You can be angry about it later when you're not bleeding." A very long pause. "Fine," she said. Just the one word. But the way she said it told him that she was a woman who picked her battles carefully and had decided in this particular moment that this wasn't one worth fighting. He carried her out of the supply room, through the trading post, and out into the morning light. When the sun hit her face, she flinched and closed her eyes. He adjusted his hold to keep the light off her. He didn't explain the gesture, he just did it. He got her onto his horse. It took some doing, and she made no sound, even when it clearly cost her, and he climbed up behind her and turned them back toward the Caldwell ranch. The rifle could wait. Silas Beaumont could wait. Every single thing on his list for that morning could wait. "How long were you in that room?" he asked as they rode. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. "I don't know," she finally said. "It was dark. I couldn't tell how many times the light came and went under the door." He did the math in his head and didn't like the answer he arrived at. "How far did they take you from where they found you?" Another pause. "Found me? That's an interesting way to put it." He waited. "They didn't find me," she said. "I was traveling west with my brother. We came through a settlement 3 days east of here. There's a man there, a businessman. He runs operations through the territory supply routes, freight contracts, that sort of thing. But underneath it..." She stopped. Her breath caught. She steadied herself before continuing. "Underneath it is something else. People going missing. Workers who sign contracts and never come back. Families looking for sons and daughters and getting nothing but silence. And your brother found this out. My brother started asking questions, she said. That's all he did. He asked questions. He talked to people. He wrote things down. And then one morning he wasn't there anymore. Ethan kept his eyes on the trail ahead. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, she said. And there was no bitterness in it. Just something flat and exhausted and completely certain. Find out what happened to him. He didn't answer immediately. He was thinking. He was thinking about several things at once the way he always did when a problem presented itself, running through pieces of it, checking angles, measuring what he knew against what he didn't. These men, he said, the ones who put you in that room, you'd seen their faces. I'd seen more than their faces, she said. I'd seen their ledgers. That was when Ethan Caldwell understood that Anna Whitmore was not simply a woman who'd been left to die in a supply room. She was a witness, and someone had made the very significant miscalculation of leaving her alive. He urged his horse to a faster pace. The Caldwell Ranch came into view after another hour of riding. It was exactly the kind of place that told you everything you needed to know about its owner without saying a word. Large without being ostentatious. Maintained without being fussy. The fences were solid. The equipment was in good repair. The people moving around the property hands workers, a few women hanging washing, moved with the kind of easy efficiency that came from being treated fairly and working for someone they respected. Whose place is this? Anna asked. She'd said almost nothing for the last half hour. Mine. She looked around slowly. He could feel her taking it in. You're wealthy. Reasonably. And you're bringing me here instead of taking me to town. Yes. A beat. Why? He considered the question honestly. Because every man with authority in that town has his hand in somebody's pocket, and right now I don't know whose pocket that is. Until I do, you're safer here. She said nothing for a moment. Then, you don't know me. No, he agreed. I could be lying. I could have made all of that up. You could have, he agreed again. But the marks on your wrists aren't a lie. And the blood on your dress isn't a lie. And nobody spends 2 or 3 days locked in a dark room and comes out of it making up stories. She was quiet. Also, he added, if you were lying, you'd have tried harder to seem pitiful. You've done nothing of the kind. Something shifted in her. He felt it more than saw it, a small, almost imperceptible easing. Not trust, not yet. But the recognition, maybe, that she was not going to have to keep fighting quite so hard in the next few hours. I need to find out what happened to my brother, she said. I know, he said. That's not a small thing to ask. No, he said. It isn't. And I'm not asking you to do it. I'm going to do it myself. I just need... She stopped, like she wasn't sure exactly what she was going to say next, or like the words were ones she wasn't accustomed to using. I just need somewhere to be for a little while I get back on my feet. That, Ethan said, I can do. He brought his horse to a stop in front of the main house and swung down first, then helped her down. She accepted the help without arguing this time, which told him how much the ride had cost her. A woman came out of the front door before they'd even reached the steps. She was somewhere in her 60s, built square and solid, with a face like a piece of wood that had been out in the weather for a long time, not harsh, but worn to something honest and permanent. She took one look at Anna, and her expression shifted from inquiry to action in the span of a single heartbeat. Lord in heaven, she said, not dramatically, just as a plain statement of fact. Margaret. Ethan kept his voice even. This is Anna. She needs medical attention. She's been held somewhere for the better part of 3 days. She's got injuries to her wrists and face, and I suspect there may be more that I can't see. Margaret Hayes had been Ethan's housekeeper for 7 years. Before that, she'd served 2 years as a field nurse in an army hospital in Kansas. She did not ask unnecessary questions. She stepped forward immediately and took Anna's other arm with a capable, impersonal gentleness. Come on then, honey, she said. Let's get you inside. Anna let herself be guided up the steps. At the top, she paused and looked back at Ethan. "You don't know what you're getting into," she said. "Probably not," he agreed. "The man who did this to me, he has connections you can't imagine. Money, influence, friends in high places." "So do I," Ethan said. She studied him for a moment. Her swollen eye was half closed, and her lip was still bleeding slightly, and she was standing on steps. She'd barely made it up, and she looked at him with those direct, exhausted, furious eyes. "His name is Caleb Whitmore," she said. The name hit Ethan like cold water. He kept his face exactly as it was. Still. Quiet. The face of a man who has had a great deal of practice at not showing what is happening inside him. But his jaw tightened. Just once. Just for a fraction of a second. Because Ethan knew that name. He knew it well. Caleb Whitmore. Freight operator. Businessman. Longtime customer who had used Ethan's supply routes through the territory for the better part of 4 years. Who had attended 3 dinners at this very house. Who had shaken Ethan's hand and smiled broadly and called him a good man and a good businessman. Who had on 2 separate occasions brought fine whiskey and talked long into the evening about the future of Montana Territory and the kind of men who were going to build it. Ethan had considered him, if not a friend, then at minimum a trustworthy associate. He looked at Anna. He looked at what Caleb Whitmore's men had done to her. He looked at the marks on her wrists. "Go inside with Margaret," he said. His voice was very quiet now. "Get cleaned up. Rest. When you're ready to talk more, I'll be here to listen." She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded once and went inside. The door closed behind her. Ethan stood on his porch for a long time after that. The morning light was full now, clean and hard across the Montana hills. The ranch was going about its ordinary business around him. Horses moved in the corral. Someone hammered at something near the equipment shed. The smell of wood smoke and dry grass was exactly the same as it had been every morning for the past 15 years. But something was different. He could feel it. Something had shifted in the air, or maybe in himself, the way the atmosphere shifts just before a bad storm, that change in pressure, that every creature in the territory registers in its bones long before the clouds arrive. He had known Caleb Whitmore, and somewhere in the past 4 years, without realizing it, he had helped the man hide. He had thought his routes were moving freight. He had been pleased to offer them. The extra income was nothing to him, but the business had seemed legitimate, and Ethan was a man who liked things to function well and efficiently and without unnecessary complication. He understood now what had actually been moving through those routes. He didn't have proof yet, but he understood. And when a man like Ethan Caldwell understood something, he did not let it rest. He went inside. Margaret had taken Anna to the room at the end of the east hall, the one that got good light in the morning and was close to the kitchen in case someone needed to be in and out with supplies. Ethan stopped at the door and knocked lightly. "She's sleeping," Margaret said, opening the door just wide enough to speak through. "Dropped off almost before I got the cloth on her wrists. She was fighting it, but she just couldn't hold on anymore." "How bad?" "Bad enough." Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes said more. "Wrists are going to heal. Face is going to heal. She's lost some blood, but not dangerous amounts. She's dehydrated and hungry, and she's running on pure grit at this point." A pause. "Ethan, what happened to her?" "Someone locked her in a room and left her to die," he said simply. Margaret's jaw set in that particular way it did when she was deeply angry, but had decided that this was not the moment to be angry because there was something more immediate to focus on. "Who?" he considered. "I need to know more before I say." She nodded. She understood him well enough after 7 years to know that this was not evasiveness. This was precision. Ethan Caldwell did not throw names around before he was sure of what those names meant. "She wakes up and wants to talk," he said. "Come find me. And in the meantime," he said, "I need to look at some paperwork." He went to his office. It was a large room at the front of the house, lined on 2 sides with shelves carrying ledgers and correspondence going back to the founding of the ranch. Ethan was not as some wealthy men were, a man who left his business details to others. He kept his own records. He tracked his own accounts. He knew every contract, every route, every agreement he'd entered into since he'd first put his name on a piece of land in Montana Territory. He pulled the files for the past 4 years. He started with the freight contracts. It took him most of the morning. He read slowly and carefully the way he read everything, not looking for what he expected to find, but letting the pages tell him what they wanted to say. Contract dates, route details, shipment manifests, origin points, destination points, pickup contacts, delivery signatures. He read it all, and as the morning wore on, and the stack of files on his desk grew, and the cup of coffee Margaret had brought him went cold and forgotten, Ethan Caldwell began to see the pattern. It was elegant in its way. He could almost admire the construction of it if it hadn't made him sick. Caleb Whitmore's legitimate freight contracts provided the perfect cover. Real goods moved through real routes on real schedules. The paperwork was clean. The payments were on time. Anyone auditing the operation would have found exactly what they expected to find: a straightforward freight business operating efficiently through established territorial routes. What they would not have seen, unless they knew exactly what to look for, were the discrepancies. The routes that ran at slightly unusual hours. The manifests that listed quantities that didn't quite add up to the size of the scheduled wagons. The delivery signatures that were always just slightly illegible. The origin points that, when you mapped them, traced back to a cluster of small settlements 3, 4, 5 days east of where Anna Whitmore's brother had started asking questions. Ethan sat back in his chair. He pressed the tips of his fingers together. I thought about his wife Claire, who had died doing something good, and how he had told himself afterward that the lesson was to stick to what you could control and manage and measure. Business, land, practical things, useful things. He had told himself that emotion was a liability, and that the best thing he could do with his position and his resources was to be reliable and efficient. He had been reliable. He had been efficient. And someone had used that reliability to do terrible things. He felt something move through him. It was not rage exactly. Rage was too hot, too fast. What moved through Ethan Caldwell that morning was something colder and more deliberate. Something that had the quality of a decision being made in a very deep and permanent place. There was a knock at the office door. "She's awake," Margaret said from the other side. "And she's asking for you." He closed the files. He stood up, straightened his jacket out of habit, and went to the door. "She eat anything?" he asked. "Managed some broth, little bread. She's—" Margaret paused. "She's steadier than I expected, honestly. Woman's got iron in her." "I know," he said. He went down the hall to the east room. Anna was sitting up in bed, her wrists wrapped in clean cloth, her dark hair combed back and tied, wearing one of the plain cotton sleep shirts Margaret kept in the guest room. The swelling on her face was still livid, but her eyes were clearer. She'd had some hours of sleep and some food, and she was very clearly using every bit of recovered strength to sit up straight and look like someone in full command of herself, rather than someone who had barely survived the last 3 days. He pulled the chair from the corner up to the side of the bed and sat down. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," she said. He gave her the small nod that acknowledged the answer without requiring her to elaborate on it. "You said your brother was asking questions about Caleb Whitmore's operation." "Yes." "What kind of questions specifically?" She studied him for a moment, like she was still taking his measure. "Why does that matter?" "Because I've spent the last 3 hours going through 4 years of freight contracts," he said. "Caleb Whitmore has been using my supply routes as part of whatever he's running. I didn't know. I want to understand exactly what he's been doing, so I can determine how much I contributed to it and what evidence I already have in my possession." A silence. Something crossed her face. It was complicated. He had a sense that she was recalibrating something. "You're serious," she said. "I don't make statements I'm not serious about." She looked at her hands, the wrapped wrists. "Daniel, my brother, he started with the workers. Men who'd signed on with Whitmore's freight operation under short-term labor contracts. They were supposed to work a season, get paid, move on. But they weren't coming back. Their families were writing letters, asking at settlement offices, asking anyone who'd listen, and the answer they got was always the same. Her voice didn't waver. She was keeping it very precisely level. That the man had taken his pay and moved on. That he was probably up in the Northern Territories or down in the South somewhere. That men do that. Move on. But Daniel didn't believe it. Daniel talked to the families. He said he wrote to me about it. He said the thing that struck him was that these weren't men who moved on. They were men with roots. Men with mothers writing letters and shaking hands about sons who always sent money home and then suddenly stopped. Men with young wives who were waiting. She paused. Drew a breath. Daniel found 6 families in a 2-week period, all with the same story, all connected to Whitmore's operations. And he wrote this down. He wrote all of it down. He always wanted to be a journalist. He kept careful notes. He was building something, a record, evidence. Her jaw tightened. He wrote to me 3 weeks ago and said he was getting close to something, that he'd found people who'd actually seen where the workers were being taken, that there was a camp somewhere in the hills west of the settlements, and that Whitmore was running an operation there that was, he called it, something beyond labor contracts. He said people were being held, worked, not paid, not allowed to leave. Ethan was very still. The letter after that one, she said, didn't come from Daniel. It came from one of Whitmore's men, telling me that my brother had moved on, that he'd collected his things and headed north. Her voice stayed level, entirely level, but her hands resting in her lap had closed into fists. So I came myself. To find him. To find him. Ethan looked at her hands, the fists in her lap, the wrapped wrists, the split lip, the bruised cheek. He looked at all of it, and he thought about what it cost a person to make the choice she had made to come alone into territory. She didn't know after men who had already made it very clear what they were willing to do to protect their operation. You got close enough to see the ledgers, he said. I got a job in a settlement store 2 days east of here. Whitmore passes through. His men pass through. I listened. I watched. And then... She stopped. And then I found a way into one of his offices while a shipment was being arranged. I found records, accounts, names, dates, payments to officials, payments to people I recognized as territorial authorities. Lists of names of workers with notes beside them that weren't labor notes. She met his eyes. I had just enough time to read some of it before someone came back. I ran. They caught me 2 hours later on the road. Her chin went up slightly. But they didn't catch the notes I'd already made in my head. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. You remember what you read, he said. It wasn't a question. I remember everything I read, she said. I always have. He sat forward slightly. Anna, I need you to understand something. He kept his voice quiet the way he always did when something mattered. What you're describing, what you've walked into, is larger than one man. Caleb Whitmore has been operating through this territory for years. He has relationships with people who have authority. He has money. He has been very careful. And he has up to this point had every reason to believe that what he's doing is invisible. I know all of that, she said. I'm not finished, he said. What you also need to understand is that everything you've just told me, every part of it, I believe you. I've got 4 years of records sitting in my office that support what you're describing even before you said a word of it. And I have resources, connections, and enough leverage in this territory to make the kind of noise that doesn't get easily silenced. She looked at him. I'm not offering this out of pity, he said. I'm offering it because I am the man whose roots were used to hide this operation. And that means I have a responsibility. You understand the difference? A long, long pause. I told you I wasn't asking for your help, she said. You told me that, yes. He held her gaze. But I'm not asking your permission. Something shifted in her face. For the first time in the smallest possible degree, the absolute tight control she'd been holding over her expression relaxed. Not into softness. Not into relief. Into something more like recognition. Like she was seeing something she had not expected to see in the face of a wealthy rancher who had every comfortable reason to look away. What are you going to do? she asked. First, he said, I'm going to find the people who were moved through my roots. I'm going to find out where they are and who's keeping them. He paused. And then, I'm going to find your brother. Her breath caught. Just once. Just for a fraction of a second. The only moment of fracture in all that careful, rigid composure. And then she had herself back. He might be dead, she said. Her voice was perfectly steady when she said it, like she had made herself say it 1,000 times in the dark of that supply room, until the words no longer had the power to knock her down. He might be, Ethan agreed. He did not offer her false comfort. She would not have thanked him for it. But until we know that for certain, we're going to proceed as though he isn't. A silence fell between them. Outside the window, the Montana hills were going gold in the afternoon light. Somewhere in the ranch, someone was calling out to someone else about the horses, the ordinary sound of a place going about its life. There's something else, Anna said. He waited. When I worked at the store in the settlement, there were others like me. People who suspected. A doctor who treated workers and had seen things she couldn't explain. A man who'd worked for Whitmore's operation and gotten out and lived to regret knowing what he knew. She looked at Ethan steadily. They're scared. But they're not gone. If someone reached out to them, someone with enough standing that they believed it might actually make a difference. You think they'd come forward, he said. I think, she said carefully, that people will do surprising things when they believe someone is actually listening. Ethan thought about Claire, about how she had believed exactly that, about how it had gotten her killed, and how in the bitterest years after he had told himself she'd been wrong. That the world did not work the way she believed it did. That faith in people was a luxury that reality could not sustain. He had been so certain of that, for so long. He stood up. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we start. She looked up at him from the bed, this woman who had been left to die in a locked room and was already thinking about who else needed saving. Ethan, she said. He paused at the door. Why are you really doing this? He thought about the honest answer for a moment. He was a man who preferred honesty to comfortable explanations. Because someone I loved once told me that the measure of a person isn't what they build, he said. It's what they protect. And I've been building for 15 years. He looked at her. I think it's time I remembered the other half. He closed the door quietly behind him, in the east room. Anna Whitmore lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling and breathed. Just breathed. The kind of breathing you do when something inside you has been wound so tight for so long that the simple act of not having to hold everything together for 60 consecutive seconds is something close to overwhelming. She did not cry. She hadn't cried in a very long time, but she closed her eyes, and somewhere in the part of herself where she kept the things that mattered most, she thought Daniel. Hold on. Someone's coming. And in his office, Ethan Caldwell sat down at his desk, opened the top drawer, and took out a piece of paper. He picked up his pen. He began to write. There were people in this territory who owed him favors, people who trusted him, people who would, if he asked them carefully and honestly, do things that went well beyond the ordinary. I was going to need every one of them. Because Caleb Whitmore had spent years building a wall of money and influence and carefully maintained silence. He had built it well. He had built it high. But Ethan Caldwell had spent those same years building something too, and he was about to find out which one of them had built something that lasted. He wrote until the lamp beside him was the only light left in the house, and in the east room at the end of the hall. Anna Whitmore finally slept. Really slept. Deeply. Slept for the first time in 4 days. Both of them dreamed of the same thing, though neither would have admitted it. The truth coming out into the light. And the men who had believed they were untouchable finally facing what they'd done. The next morning came fast and cold, the way mornings did in Montana when summer was starting to think about letting go. Ethan was already at his desk before the sun was fully up. The lamp still burning the stack of papers he'd been working through the night before, reorganized into something that looked less like a mess and more like a map. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours. He hadn't tried very hard. Margaret brought him coffee without being asked and set it down without saying anything. She knew him well enough to understand when he was in the middle of something, and talking would only slow him down. He was going through the route logs again, this time not looking for pattern, this time looking for names. The delivery signatures that had always been slightly illegible, he could read them now. Not perfectly, but well enough. And the names he was finding, the names that appeared again and again on pickup manifests and freight receipts and supply confirmations, were names he recognized. Not friends, not close associates, but men he had seen at territorial meetings, men who attended the same merchant dinners, men who appeared on the same courthouse records as witnesses and co-signers and guarantors. Caleb Whitmore had not built a criminal operation. He had built a community, and Ethan had been standing at its edges, a respectable neighbor, lending it credibility by proximity alone. He set down his pen and pressed both hands flat on the desk. "You need to eat something," Margaret said from the doorway. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." He looked up. She was standing with her arms crossed in that way she had, the way that made it very clear the conversation was not optional. "How is she?" he asked. "Awake. Been awake about an hour. She's already asked me twice for paper and something to write with." Margaret's expression shifted slightly. "I gave her what she asked for. She's been writing ever since." Ethan sat back. "Writing what?" "Names, far as I can tell. Dates. Didn't look closely. Wasn't my business." A pause. "Ethan, that young woman is carrying something heavy." "I know. I don't mean her injuries." Margaret looked at him steadily. "I mean the kind of weight that comes from being the only person who knows the whole shape of something terrible. The kind of weight where you're scared to sleep too deep because you're afraid you'll forget something, or that something will happen to you before you can get it out." He was quiet for a moment. "She'll be all right. I didn't say she wouldn't." Margaret turned to go, then stopped. "There's a rider came in 20 minutes ago. One of the hands flagged him down at the east fence line. Says he's looking for you. Name's Thomas Reed." Ethan was on his feet before she finished the sentence. Thomas Reed had worked the Caldwell Ranch for 3 seasons, 4 years back. A quiet, capable man with a bad leg from an old accident and enough common sense to make up for the leg 10 times over. He'd left to take work with a freight operation going east. Ethan had assumed it was just the natural drift of a man looking for something new. He hadn't thought much about it at the time. He hadn't known which freight operation Thomas had signed on with. He knew now. He walked out to meet him. Thomas was standing by the water trough, holding the reins of a horse that had clearly been ridden hard and recently, and he looked up when Ethan came through the door with an expression that was equal parts relief and something that might have been shame. "Mr. Caldwell," he said. "Thomas?" Ethan stopped a few feet away and looked at him properly. The man was thinner than he remembered. There was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "How'd you find me?" "Word travels." Thomas looked down at the ground for a moment, then back up. "I heard there was a woman found at Silas Beaumont's post yesterday. Heard she'd been locked in the back room. Heard a rider took her somewhere." He paused. "And I knew if she was alive and talking, and if whoever found her had any sense at all, they'd be doing exactly what I figured you were doing." "And what did you figure I was doing?" Thomas met his eyes. "Looking into Caleb Whitmore." "A beat. Come inside," Ethan said. They sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, Ethan, Thomas, and Anna, who had come down the hall slowly, but without assistance, the papers she'd been writing held in her wrapped hands. Margaret stood near the stove and said nothing, but didn't leave either, which was her particular way of making herself available without inserting herself. Thomas looked at Anna for a long moment, at her wrists, at her face. His jaw tightened. "You're Daniel Whitmore's sister," he said. Anna went completely still. "You knew my brother," she said. It wasn't a question. "I worked with him for 6 weeks," Thomas said, "before things went bad." He set his hat down on this table and ran one hand across his face. "I signed on with Whitmore's freight operation about 1.5 years ago. Looked clean enough. Good pay, regular routes, no questions asked about what you had going on before. That last part should have told me something, but I was glad to have the work." He stopped, looked at his hands. The first month was exactly what it looked like. Freight, legitimate goods. I didn't see anything wrong. When did that change? Ethan asked. Second month they asked me to run a different kind of route, night routes mostly. The manifests were lighter than the loads. The pickup points were settlements, small ones, places where people were desperate enough to take any work offered. Thomas's voice was flat and carefully controlled. The first time I understood what I was actually transporting, I wanted to quit. And then they made it clear to me what happened to people who quit. Anna's hands tightened on the papers in her lap. What did happen to people who quit? Thomas looked at her. There was a man named Peters, signed on the same week I did. Good worker, smart. He started asking too many questions about where the night routes ended up. 1 week he was there. The next week they told us he'd collected his pay and moved on. He paused. His boots were still under his bunk. A silence fell over the kitchen. Your brother arrived about 4 months into my time there, Thomas continued. He didn't say who he was or why he was really there. Said he was looking for work. They took him on because they always needed hands who could move quickly and stay quiet. A pause. But Daniel Whitmore was the worst kind of bad liar. Not because he was clumsy, because he cared too much. You could see it in how he looked at the people on those night routes, the workers we were picking up. He'd see them in the wagons, and his whole face would change, and he couldn't stop it from changing, and I knew right then that he wasn't there for the work. Anna's eyes were very bright. She wasn't blinking. Did you talk to him? Pulled him aside 2 days in, Thomas said. Told him that whatever he was doing, he needed to be careful. That this operation was not what it looked like, and the people running it were not the kind of men who gave second chances. He looked at her steadily. He told me he was keeping records, that he had enough already to take to someone with authority. He asked me if I knew anyone he could trust. What did you tell him? Thomas looked at Ethan. I told him I used to work for a rancher named Caldwell. That if there was one man in this territory whose name hadn't come up once in any of Whitmore's conversations, whose routes were being used without his knowledge, who might actually have both the resources and the integrity to do something about it, it was him. Ethan looked at Thomas for a moment. Something moved across his face that he didn't try to hide. You knew about the routes. I figured it out, Thomas said. I recognized the route numbers on some of the manifests, same format you always used. I don't know if they forged your paperwork or just bought access from someone, but your routes were involved. Mr. Caldwell. I'm sorry. I should have come to you sooner. He stopped. I was afraid. I'm not proud of that. Ethan shook his head once. Not in dismissal of the apology, in refusal to let the man carry more weight than he had to. You're here now. That's what matters. What happened to Daniel after you talked to him? Anna asked. Her voice was absolutely steady. The steadiness of someone who has decided they need to hear the truth regardless of what it is, and has made their peace with that. Thomas's expression changed. 3 days after that conversation, they called him in for a different kind of job. Night route, but farther east than usual. He went. He didn't come back. He looked at her directly, which clearly took effort. I don't know what happened to him, Miss Whitmore. I want to be honest with you about that. I don't know if he's... Is he alive? She said. Just that. Just those 3 words. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When I left 2 weeks ago, there were men being held at a camp about 3 days' ride east and north. Remote. Back in the hills where no one goes in winter. I never got close enough to see clearly. But the people who came back from certain routes, they talked in ways that suggested those camps were that there were people in them who weren't there by choice and hadn't been there a week or 2. He paused. If Daniel is alive anywhere, it's there. Anna set the papers down on the table. She folded her hands on top of them, and she looked at Ethan. I need to know where that camp is, she said. Thomas. Ethan said, you think you can find it again? I can get close, Thomas said. I can't promise close enough. The approach trails change regularly. They move them so no one builds a clear picture of the route. That's all right, Ethan said. Close is enough to start. He stood up. He moved to the window, not to look at anything in particular, just to think on his feet, the way he always did, when something complex needed to settle into a shape he could work with. We need more than the 3 of us. We need people who have seen enough of what Whitmore is doing to testify to it. We need documentation. And we need to move before Whitmore has time to realize that Anna is not only alive, but talking. He'll know soon enough, Thomas said grimly. Man like that has ears everywhere. I'm counting on it, Ethan said. Something in his voice made both Thomas and Anna look at him. If he knows Anna is alive and at my ranch, he's going to have a decision to make. He can move against us, which puts him in the open. Or he can try to wait us out, which gives us time to build a case. He turned from the window. Either way, the pressure is on him now, not on us. We just have to make sure we're moving faster than he thinks we are. There's a doctor, Anna said. She picked up her papers and glanced through them. Dr. Sarah Collins. She practices out of a settlement called Graywood 2 days east. She's treated workers who were injured on Whitmore's operation. She kept records. Medical notes that she told me she didn't know what to do with because she didn't know who to trust. She looked up. She trusted me enough to tell me they existed. You think she'll hand them over? Thomas asked. I think, Anna said carefully, that she's been waiting for someone to ask. Ethan nodded. I'll send a writer. Not a writer, Anna said. A letter. In your name. With your seal. Something that tells her the conversation is serious, and that it's not going to lead back to something happening to her. A pause. These people have been scared for a long time. They need to believe that the person reaching out to them has enough standing to actually protect them. Ethan looked at her. You've been thinking about this for a while. I've had a lot of time in a locked room, she said flatly. And then, before the sentence could land as heavily as it might have, she moved on. There's also a man named William Hawk. He's a tracker, works freelance out of the northern part of the territory. He was hired by Whitmore for a short period last spring, and then he wasn't. He came through the settlement where I was working about a month ago. He didn't say much, but he watched everything. And when he left, he gave me a look that I've thought about every day since. What kind of look? Thomas asked. The kind that means he knows something and is waiting to find out if you're someone worth telling it to, Anna said. Ethan looked at Thomas. You know Hawk. Know of him. Good tracker. Honest reputation. Hard to find when he doesn't want to be found. Then we start with Dr. Collins, Ethan said. She's closer, and she's got documentation. He moved to his desk in the adjacent room, already pulling out paper. Thomas, I need everything you remember about those routes. Not the roads, the people, the names, the pickup points, the men who ran things on the ground. Anna, I need you to go through your memory, everything you read in Whitmore's office, everything you saw. Dates, numbers, names, all of it. I've already started, she said, holding up the papers. He looked at the pages she'd been writing. Covered in a close, precise hand. No wasted space. Every line used. He looked at the writing and thought about what it must have taken to hold all of that inside her head through 3 days in a locked room and then organize it into something this orderly the moment she had paper. This is good, he said. This is very good. She didn't say anything. But something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Margaret from the kitchen said, Breakfast is on the table, and none of you are leaving this house before you eat it. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. They ate quickly, and without much ceremony, and while they ate, Thomas talked. He talked about the routes, and the names, and the patterns he'd seen over 18 months of working an operation that he had tried to convince himself was salvageable, right up until the moment he understood it was not. He talked with the particular kind of honesty that comes from a man who has been carrying a guilty conscience long enough that the relief of putting it down outweighs the shame of showing that he was carrying it. Anna listened to everything. She asked 3 or 4 precise targeted questions, the kind that cut straight to the information she needed without anything extra. Ethan noticed that she never interrupted to add her own experience or make the comparison to what she'd seen. She filed what Thomas said away and moved on. She was building something in her head, adding to what she already had, and she was going to have the full shape of it clearly assembled before she said another word about what it meant. He recognized the way her mind worked, because it worked similarly to his own. After breakfast, Ethan wrote the letter to Dr. Collins. He drafted it twice, then showed the second version to Anna. Change this part, she said, pointing to a paragraph near the end. You're explaining too much. If she has to read too much justification, she'll wonder why you're working so hard to convince her. Just state what you need and what you're offering. Keep it short. Let her fill in the rest. He read the paragraph again. She was right. He changed it. You want to read the final version? He asked. Yes, she said. Not as a request, just a statement of intent. He handed it to her when it was done. She read it through once, handed it back. Good. He sealed it and called his most trusted writer, a young man named Henry, who had been with the ranch for 2 years, and who Ethan knew could be counted on to be discreet and fast. Graywood Settlement, Ethan told him. You find a doctor named Sarah Collins. You put this letter directly in her hand. Nobody else. You wait for a reply. If she doesn't give you one within a day, you come back and tell me what she said when she read it. Henry nodded, took the letter, and was gone within 10 minutes. After that, Ethan went to find 2 of the ranch hands he trusted most, brothers named Cal and Pete Drummond, who had been working the property since before Ethan had made his first significant money, and who were loyal in the way that men are loyal when they've seen someone treat people right over a long period of time rather than just when it was convenient. I explained the situation to them plainly, without softening anything. He told them about Anna. He told them about the camp. He told them about Caleb Whitmore. Cal listened with his arms crossed and his hat pushed back on his head, which was how he always listened when something serious was being discussed. When Ethan finished, he said, You're saying Whitmore's been using your roots? Yes. And you're going to do something about it? Yes. Cal and Pete exchanged one of those silent conversations that brothers who have worked together for 20 years can have in about 2 seconds. Then Cal looked back at Ethan. Tell us what you need. This was the thing about having built something honestly over a long period of time. The loyalty it generated was not the loyalty of men who were afraid of what would happen if they said no. It was the loyalty of men who genuinely believed in what they were part of and didn't want to see it compromised. Ethan had spent 15 years building that. He was about to need every bit of it. I was still talking through the logistics with the Drummond brothers when Anna appeared in the doorway of the equipment room where they were gathered. She had her coat on, one of Margaret's slightly too large for her, and she was holding the papers she'd been writing on, now folded and tucked into a pocket. There's a rider on the East Road, she said, coming fast. Everyone stopped talking. Cal moved to the window. One man, he said. Riding hard, not one of ours. Ethan crossed the room in 4 strides and looked. The rider was still a distance out, but approaching at a speed that said either something was wrong or something was urgent, or both. He wore no identifying colors. His horse was a plain bay. Nothing about him said anything at all, which was in itself a kind of message. Nobody do anything sudden, Ethan said quietly. Cal, you and Pete stay back, but stay visible. Thomas, go inside. Anna. I'll stay, she said. He looked at her. If this is someone Whitmore sent, they already know I'm here, she said steadily. Hiding doesn't change that. He couldn't argue with the logic. Stay behind me, he said. She didn't argue with that either, which told him her read on the situation matched his. The rider came into the yard and pulled up hard. He was young, early 20s, out of breath from the ride. His eyes went immediately to Ethan, then slid to Anna, then back. Mr. Caldwell, he said. That's right. My name's Jonah. I ride for Dr. Sarah Collins out of Graywood. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. She says she didn't wait for a letter. She's been waiting for a reason to act for 7 months. Says she's ready to talk and she's got a man with her, says you might know him. Name of William Hawk. Everything stopped for a very brief moment. Then Anna made a sound. Not loud. Just a short, sharp exhale of breath that was not quite a laugh and not quite relief, but was something in between that contained more emotion than anything she had shown since Ethan had found her in that supply room. Both of them, she said, at the same time. It appears so, Ethan said. Thomas appeared in the doorway of the house behind them. He had clearly been listening from just inside. Hawk was already with Collins. Appears he found his own reason to move, Ethan said. He looked at Jonah. Where are they? Half day's ride out, Jonah said. Coming this direction. Collins said she'd move as soon as she had confirmation that this wasn't a trap. You can give her that confirmation, Ethan said. He stepped forward and took the envelope, opened it, scanned the contents. Dr. Collins wrote the way Anna had suggested he write: short, precise, no wasted words. She listed what she had: names, dates, medical documentation, going back 7 months. She listed what she'd seen. And at the bottom, in handwriting that pressed harder into the paper than the rest, she wrote, I have been silent too long. Tell me it is not too late to matter. He passed the letter to Anna without saying anything. She read it. Her expression didn't change, but she held the paper for a moment longer than she needed to before handing it back. Tell her it's not too late, she said to Jonah. Tell her to come. Tell her she will be safe here. Jonah looked at Ethan, checking. You heard her, Ethan said. Jonah turned his horse and rode. The yard was quiet for a moment after he left. Thomas let out a long, slow breath. All right, he said. This just got real. It was always real, Anna said. She turned and went back inside. Thomas looked at Ethan. Ethan watched the doorway she'd disappeared through, thinking about what it meant that Dr. Collins and William Hawke had found each other independently. Thinking about what it meant that people who had been frightened and isolated for months were beginning on their own to turn toward the same point. Not because anyone had organized them, because the weight of what they knew had finally become heavier than the fear of what might happen if they said it out loud. That was the thing about the truth. You could bury it. You could cover it with money and influence and carefully maintained silence. You could make people afraid of it. You could make people believe no one was listening. But it kept growing. It always kept growing. And the longer you kept it buried, the more pressure built up underneath it. Caleb Whitmore had been keeping his particular truth buried for years. Ethan could feel the pressure now from where he stood in his own yard, under a Montana sky going pale gold and wide as the world. He thought about Claire. He thought about how she used to say that the moment you decided to stop looking away from something was the moment it lost its power to overwhelm you. He had thought that was too simple when she'd said it. He had told her so. She'd smiled at him the way she always did when she was certain she was right and was willing to wait for him to catch up. He understood it now. Inside in the east room at the end of the hall, he could hear Anna moving. The sound of her pacing, not anxiously but purposefully. Thinking. Planning. Already ahead of the next 3 steps, in a way that made it very clear she had not survived 3 days in a locked room by luck. She had survived by being exactly the kind of person who, the moment the door opened, was already thinking about what came next. He went inside. He went to the room at the end of the hall. He knocked. Come in, she said. She was standing at the small table by the window papers spread out in front of her. She had clearly reorganized everything while he'd been in the yard. The pages were grouped by what Ethan could see at a glance were categories: names in one group, dates in another, locations in a third. You work fast, he said. We don't have a lot of time, she said, not anxiously, just factually. When Whitmore finds out that Collins and Hawke are both moving, and he will find out. He has people in those settlements. He's going to understand that something is organizing against him. He's going to want to move first. I know, Ethan said. I've been thinking about that. We need to get to the camp, she said, before he does. He looked at her. You want to go in? I need to go in, she said. Not just to look for Daniel, to get those people out. Whatever is in Collins' records, and in Thomas's memory, and in mine, it means nothing if Whitmore can make the evidence disappear. And the most important evidence he has right now is not in his ledgers. She looked at him steadily. It's the people he's holding. She wasn't wrong. He knew she wasn't wrong. If we move toward the camp and he gets word, Ethan said, he has the option of clearing it out before we get there, moving the people again, leaving nothing but empty buildings. Which is why we move before he has time to react, she said. We have a window. Collins and Hawke are half a day out. Thomas knows the routes. Cal and Pete and your other men can handle the riding and whatever comes at the end of it. She paused. And I know what the camp looks like. You've been there, he said. Not inside, she said, but close enough. They moved me through that area when they were transporting me. I wasn't unconscious the whole time." She looked at the papers on the table. "I have a good enough picture of the approach to get us in without announcing ourselves." Ethan was quiet for a moment. There was a particular sensation he got sometimes when multiple things that had been separate suddenly came together into a clear shape. Not always a comfortable sensation. This was not comfortable. This was the feeling of understanding that a thing he had been approaching carefully and methodically had its own momentum now, and that the window for careful and methodical was narrowing. "When Collins and Hawk get here," he said, "we share everything, we compare everything, and then we move." Anna looked at him. "Agreed." "One condition," he said. She waited. "You tell me if it gets to be too much," he said. "Not because I'll make you stop, but because I need to know what I'm working with. You understand the difference." A long pause. She was clearly deciding whether to be offended by the question. He could see her working through it. "I understand the difference," she said finally. "And I'll tell you." A beat. "Same condition applies to you." He almost smiled again. He was almost smiling more in the last 18 hours than he had in the last several months, which was a strange thing to notice at a moment like this, and he noticed it anyway. "Agreed?" he said. He turned to go. He was almost to the door when she said quietly, "Ethan." He stopped, turned back. "My brother." She stopped, started again. "If he's in that camp, when we get him out." She paused once more. She was choosing the words carefully, the way she chose everything carefully. "He's going to be in bad shape. Daniel is," a short breath. "He's not a hard man. He's a good man, which is different. He went after this because it was right, not because he was built for it." Her eyes were steady, but there was something behind them that she was holding very deliberately back. "I just need you to know that." Ethan looked at her for a moment. "I'll know it," he said. She nodded, once, and turned back to her papers. I walked back down the hall to his office, and he sat down, and he thought about a good man named Daniel Whitmore, who had gone after something because it was right, and paid a terrible price for being the kind of person who acted on what he believed. He thought about all the people on those manifests whose names he hadn't known were people until this morning. He thought about Thomas Reed's boots still under his bunk, the detail that had made the whole shape of it real in a way that statistics and ledger numbers couldn't. He pulled a blank sheet of paper toward him. He wrote a list of every territorial official he knew, personally, and trusted at least moderately. The list was shorter than it should have been, and longer than he had expected it to be. He circled 4 names. Men who owed him nothing, but who he believed, based on years of watching them operate, were men who had come to their positions for the right reasons, and not yet been entirely corrupted by them. I was going to need witnesses on the outside. People with authority, who could take what they found and convert it into something with legal standing. People who could make noise that didn't get silenced. He wrote letters to each of the 4 circled names. He sealed them. He put them in Henry's saddlebag mentally, for when Henry returned from Greywood, or better yet, he'd send another rider, now one for each letter, because time was narrowing, and he could feel it. Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Rider coming up the South Road," she said. 2 of them, actually. One on a solid gray horse, one on a roan. Ethan stood up fast. "That's Collins and Hawk." "Well then," Margaret said, entirely unruffled. "I'd better put more coffee on." Ethan went to the front door. The 2 riders coming up the South Road couldn't have looked more different from each other. Dr. Sarah Collins was a compact woman in her 40s, riding straight and practical, carrying a saddlebag so full it was clearly straining at the buckles. William Hawk was tall and lean, with the kind of stillness about him that certain men get when they have spent a great deal of time in places where being noticed was a liability. He rode slightly behind and to the left of Collins, scanning the property as he came in with eyes that missed nothing. They pulled up in the yard. Collins swung down before the horse had fully stopped. She looked at Ethan with eyes that were tired in a way that went back a long way. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I've been carrying what I know about Caleb Whitmore for 7 months. I've written it down. I've kept the records. And every morning I've woken up and wondered if today was the day someone was going to come for me because of it." She paused. "I'd like to do something with it now if you're willing." "I'm willing," he said. Hawk dismounted and came to stand a few feet away. He looked at Ethan. "You understand what you're taking on," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm starting to," Ethan said. Hawk studied him for another moment with those flat, observant eyes. "Good enough," he said. Anna appeared behind Ethan in the doorway. Hawk saw her, and something crossed his face. Recognition and the particular kind of relief that a person shows when they realize that someone they had feared was dead is in fact not dead. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Hawk," she said. "Then, you found the doctor." "She found me more or less," he said. "I'd been circling around Greywood for a week trying to decide if it was worth trusting anyone." A pause. "Then she knocked on the door of the place I was staying and said she'd noticed me watching the settlement, and that if I was working up the nerve to do something about Caleb Whitmore, she'd been ready for about 6 months, and I was welcome to join in." Anna looked at Collins. Collins looked back at her steadily. "You're Daniel's sister," Collins said. "Yes?" Anna said. Collins reached into her overfull saddlebag and produced a leather folder worn and thick, the kind that a person keeps something in when they want it to survive rough handling. She held it out to Anna. Anna took it, opened it, looked at the first page, then the second. Then she closed it and held it against her chest for a moment with both hands. "How many names are in here?" she asked. 43, Collins said. "That I can confirm. There may be more." 43. The number landed in the yard like a stone dropped in still water. Ethan felt the ripples of it move through everyone present. Thomas, who had come outside at some point and was standing near the fence. The Drummond brothers. Margaret in the doorway. 43 people. "All right," Ethan said. He said it quietly. He said it in the voice he used when a decision had been made, and the time for discussing was done, and what remained now was the doing of things. Everyone looked at him. "We have a lot of work to do," he said. "Let's get started." They spread everything across Ethan's dining room table that afternoon. Collins's leather folder, Anna's handwritten pages, Thomas's verbal account, which Cal Drummond transcribed in a careful hand, and Ethan's own 4 years of freight records laid out in chronological order. It took 2 hours just to organize it all. When they were done, the table looked like a map of something monstrous built piece by piece over years, each piece ordinary enough on its own, each piece devastating in context. William Hawk stood at the far end of the table and looked at all of it without speaking for a long time. He had barely said 10 words since coming inside. He looked at things the way a man looks at terrain before he has to move through it, not reading exactly, but memorizing. Building a picture in his head that he could navigate from later. "The camp," he finally said. "I know where it is." Everyone went still. "You've been there," Ethan said. "Close enough to matter," Hawk said. 2 weeks ago, I tracked a route from a settlement pickup point eastward until I lost the trail in the hills. But I got close enough to smell wood smoke and hear sounds that didn't belong to wildlife." He looked up. 3 days hard ride northeast. There's a valley that doesn't appear on any territorial map I've ever seen. The approach is through a narrow pass, one way in, one way out on horseback, unless you know the back ridge. "And do you know the back ridge?" Thomas asked. Hawk looked at him with the particular expression of a man who considers the question self-explanatory. "Right," Thomas said. Anna was already leaning over the table, moving her papers to find the section she'd written about the route she remembered from when Whitmore's men had transported her. She pointed to a section. "They kept me covered for most of it. But there was a point where they stopped, and I could feel the air change, temperature dropped like we'd gone into something enclosed. I heard water, a creek running fast from the left." Hawk looked at her. "West side of the pass. There's a creek." "Yes." He paused. "That puts you exactly where I thought." "Can we get in without being seen?" Ethan asked. "In," Hawk said. "Yes, getting in is possible. Getting in with enough men to actually accomplish something, and getting out again before they understand what's happening." He paused. "That's a different question. How many men does Whitmore have at the camp?" Collins asked. She had her medical folder open in front of her and was making notes in the margins of her own records with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent years documenting things carefully and could not stop even in a crisis. Minimum 10, maximum 20 based on what I observed, Hawk said. Armed. Rotational shifts, which means someone is always awake. The people being held. He stopped. Made a small adjustment in his expression that cost him something. They're not in a condition to run. Whatever shape they're in, we're going to have to move them. We can't count on them to move themselves fast. The room absorbed this. Anna sat down slowly. She didn't look away from the papers in front of her. Then we need more people than we have, she said. We need the right people, Ethan said. He looked at Cal and Pete Drummond. How many of the hands would come? Cal didn't hesitate. Every one of them, you ask it right. I'm not asking anyone to go into a situation like this without understanding what it is, Ethan said. I want volunteers, men who know what they're volunteering for. Then ask them tonight, Pete said. They'll understand. Ethan nodded once, then he looked around the table. Anna Thomas Hawk Collins, the Drummond brothers, Margaret standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and her expression one of grim focused determination. 7 people who had come together from completely different places around a single piece of truth, too large and too ugly to leave alone. We move the day after tomorrow, he said. That gives us tomorrow to prepare to get more information if we can, and to make sure the documentation we have is somewhere safe. Somewhere that Whitmore can't reach even if he moves against this ranch directly. You think he'll move against the ranch? Thomas asked. I think he's going to find out soon that I have Collins, Hawk, and Anna all in the same place, Ethan said. When that happens, he's going to understand that his window is closing. And men like Caleb Whitmore don't wait when they understand that. A short silence. Then Hawk said, he may already know. Everyone looked at him. There was a rider on the north road when we came in, Hawk said, as calmly as if he were talking about the weather. He wasn't heading anywhere I could see. He was watching the approach to this property. I noted him, figured I'd mention it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. And you're mentioning it now, Thomas said. I'm mentioning it now because I wanted to see how everyone here reacted under pressure before I said it. Hawk said simply. He looked around the table. I've worked jobs before where the people I was working with folded the moment things got complicated. Needed to know I wasn't in that situation again. He paused. I'm satisfied. Cal Drummond made a short sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so tense. Satisfied, he repeated. There's a rider watching the property right now, Anna said. Not panicked, just clarifying. How long before he reports back to Whitmore? Depends on how far out Whitmore is, Hawk said. If he's in town hours, if he's moving through the territory, he considered. Could be faster. Then we don't have 2 days, she said. She looked at Ethan. He was already at the door. Cal, Pete, get the men together now, all of them. I'll talk to them in the equipment barn in 20 minutes. Hal was moving before he finished the sentence. Anna caught up with him in the hallway. Ethan. He stopped and turned. The documentation. She said the leather folder and her own papers already gathered in her arms. Where do we send it? He thought for exactly 4 seconds. Margaret, he called. Margaret appeared from the kitchen. I need you to take these papers and the contents of the Collins folder to James Hartley at the Territorial Records Office in Helena. You know James. Known him 20 years, Margaret said. Then you know he's the one man in that building who actually believes what the building stands for, Ethan said. I need these in his hands before anything else happens. Take Henry with you and take the east road, not the main route. Margaret looked at the papers Anna was holding out to her. She took them with both hands and held them carefully. The way you hold something you understand is precious. How much trouble are you walking into? She asked Ethan. Enough, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now, he said. And something in his voice was honest enough that she didn't push further. She just looked at him for a moment with those worn, weather-permanent eyes, and then she turned and was already moving with efficiency and purpose. Ethan went to the equipment barn. The hands came in from all corners of the property, 12 men in total, ranging in age from barely 19 to past 60. All of them with the particular quality of people who had been doing honest work in hard country long enough that they knew the difference between something real and something performed. They stood in a loose group and looked at Ethan and said nothing, because they could read from the way he'd called them that this was not an ordinary conversation. He told them everything. He told them about Anna and the supply room and the marks on her wrists. He told them about Thomas and the roots. He told them about the camp and the 43 names in Collins's folder, and what Hawk had seen in the valley that didn't appear on any territorial map. He did not soften any of it, and he did not oversell any of it. He told it straight the way a man tells something that he believes other people deserve to hear accurately. When he finished, nobody spoke for a moment. Then a man named Curtis, who had worked the ranch for 6 years, and who Ethan knew had a younger brother, somewhere in the territory, said, "These people being held, they got families looking for them." "Yes," Ethan said. Curtis nodded. "All right," he said. That was all. 2 words. But it settled something in the room, and after that the hands started talking among themselves quietly, not debating, just organizing the way men do when a decision has already been made, and what's left is logistics. They all volunteered. Every last one. Back inside, Hawk had taken control of the planning with the quiet authority of someone who had done this kind of thing before, in contexts he hadn't elaborated on, and probably wouldn't. He had drawn a rough map on the back of one of the blank pages from Ethan's desk, the valley, the pass, the creek, the ridge. He was explaining approach angles to Thomas and the Drummond brothers when Ethan came back in. Anna was standing slightly apart, watching Hawk's explanation, but not interrupting it. She was holding a cup of coffee that Margaret must have left before departing, and she was holding it with both hands, and Ethan noticed that for the first time since he'd found her, she was not doing anything. Not writing, not organizing, not building anything, just standing and holding the cup and being still for 60 seconds. He came to stand beside her. "You all right?" he said quietly. "No," she said, just as quietly. "But I'm functional, which is close enough." He didn't say anything to that. He just stood there beside her, while Hawk and Thomas and the Drummond brothers talked through approaches and contingencies, and the silence between him and Anna was the kind that didn't need to be filled. After a moment she said, "You asked me before if it was getting to be too much." "I did. I've been thinking about Daniel all day," she said. "About what condition he's going to be in. About whether he's—" She stopped, picked up the thread again. "There's a part of my brain that keeps trying to prepare me for the worst. And then there's another part that tells me if I let that part win, I'll be useless before we even get there." "Which part is winning right now?" he asked. She looked up at him. "Yours is the only ranch in Montana Territory where I've slept in a real bed and eaten real food in a month," she said. "Right now both parts are temporarily shut up by that fact, and I'm using the quiet to think clearly." A pause. "Ask me again in an hour." He almost smiled. "I'll do that." She looked back at the map Hawk was drawing. "What he's describing, the approach through the back ridge. That's going to work, but it's going to take longer than the main pass approach." "Split approach," Ethan said, having already arrived at the same conclusion. "Part of the group takes the pass, makes noise, draws attention. The rest come in over the ridge from behind." "Yes," she said. "And whoever comes in from behind needs to be there first." "Agreed." He looked at her. "You're going in with the ridge group." She opened her mouth. "Not to protect you," he said immediately. "Because you know what you're looking at when you get there. Collins is a doctor. She goes with the ridge group too. First priority is getting to the people being held, and they'll need her the moment we find them. Hawk takes the ridge because he knows it. Thomas knows the camp from working the operation. You know Daniel and the other people by their circumstances." He paused. "That's not sentiment. That's resource allocation." A beat. "All right," she said. "I take the pass," he said. "With Cal and Pete and most of the hands. We come in loud and we draw every eye to the front." "That's dangerous," she said. "It's more dangerous for the people we're going in to find if we don't create enough distraction," he said. She looked at him steadily. "You know that the men at that camp, Whitmore's men, they're not going to just step aside." "I know. People could get hurt." "I know that too." "Are you?" She paused, started differently. Have you done something like this before? He thought about it honestly. Not exactly like this, he said. But I've handled situations that required moving fast and accepting that not everything is going to go clean. He held her gaze. I don't make promises I can't keep, Anna. I can't promise you this goes perfectly. What I can promise is that everyone going in has made their own choice to be there, and that I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure everyone comes back out. She looked at him for a long moment. That's good enough, she said. The next thing that happened moved fast, and it started with Hawk suddenly going very quiet in the middle of explaining the ridge approach to Thomas. Not the quiet of a man who has finished what he was saying. The quiet of a man who has heard something. Rider incoming, Hawk said. Front road. Moving at a walk, which means they're not running, and they're not trying to sneak. They want to be seen. Ethan moved to the front of the house. Through the window, he could see the figure Hawk had registered somehow before anyone else. A single rider on a black horse coming up the main road to the ranch at a deliberate, unhurried pace. Well-dressed. Upright in the saddle. Moving with the complete ease of someone who was accustomed to going places and having people make room for them. He felt his jaw set before he had consciously identified the rider. Caleb Whitmore, coming himself, not sending men. Coming personally in the afternoon light, like a man paying a social call. Don't touch anything, Ethan said. He was surprised by how calm his own voice was. Everyone stay inside, Anna. I heard you, she said from behind him. I'll stay back. Don't stay back, he said. Stay where you can see and hear everything. I want you to see his face. She moved to the side of the window without a word. Ethan opened the front door and walked out onto the porch and stood there with his arms loose at his sides and waited. Whitmore rode into the yard, looked up at Ethan and smiled. It was a good smile. Warm. Practiced. The smile of a man who had spent years making people feel at ease with him and had gotten very good at it. Ethan, he said, as easy as if they were meeting at one of those dinners. Good to see you. Caleb, Ethan said. Whitmore swung down from his horse. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with the particular air of authority that came from a long time of being the most powerful person in any room he entered. He let his horse's reins hang loose, trained to stand clearly, another small display of his resources, and walked toward the porch steps. Mind if I come up? He said. I do actually, Ethan said. A beat. Something moved through Whitmore's expression, but it was gone so fast you'd miss it if you weren't watching for it. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. All right, he said. We'll talk here. Still easy, still warm. I'll get to the point. I heard something came through your supply routes that shouldn't have. Some confusion in the paperwork my end, I'm embarrassed to say. I wanted to come personally and clear it up. If there's anything that looked irregular in those freight records, I can explain every bit of it. Sure you can, Ethan said. I'd also heard... Whitmore paused, tilting his head slightly, like he was choosing his words with care. I'd heard that you may have come across a young woman in some distress. Found her somewhere along one of your routes, maybe in rough shape. He looked up at Ethan with those frank, friendly eyes. I want you to know that I'm aware of the situation, and I am extremely concerned. There are bad elements operating in the territory, Ethan, we both know that. Elements that use legitimate business operations as cover. If someone connected to my freight network caused harm to an innocent woman, I want to know about it immediately. I want to see justice done. He delivered it perfectly. The concern was in the right places. The outrage was appropriately restrained. The offer to cooperate was positioned as leadership, as the behavior of a man taking responsibility. And every single word of it was a very precisely constructed lie. Ethan looked at him. He thought about the boots still under Peter's bunk. He thought about 43 names in a leather folder that was currently on its way to Helena. I thought about a young woman in a supply room breathing through cracked ribs and not making a sound because she had learned in the worst possible way how much depended on her survival. You're right, Ethan said. There are bad elements in this territory. Whitmore nodded, opened his mouth to continue. I've been going through my freight records, Ethan said. All 4 years of them. Interesting reading. A pause, shorter than a heartbeat. Whitmore recalibrated. I'm glad you've been diligent. As I said, if there's anything that looks... I'd like to talk to you about a man named Peters, Ethan said. You remember Peters? Silence. It was a very short silence, but it was the wrong kind. It was the silence of a man whose next prepared sentence doesn't fit anymore, and who is choosing a replacement very fast. I've had a great many employees, Whitmore said. Peters, Ethan said. Signed on roughly 4 years ago. Worked your freight operation for about a month. Left his boots under his bunk when he went. Something happened to Whitmore's expression. Not much. Not enough that a stranger would have caught it. But it was there, a tightening around the eyes, a very slight flattening of that warm, practiced affect. I'm not sure I recall. And 43 others, Ethan said, give or take. The warmth disappeared entirely. It didn't turn cold exactly. It turned into something that had always been underneath the warmth, something patient and calculating, and entirely without the quality that had made the warmth seem real. What replaced it was the face of a man who has just concluded that performance is no longer useful and has decided to switch to something more direct. Ethan, Whitmore said. His voice was still level, still controlled. You're a smart man. You've built something significant here. You have a reputation that people respect, a business that works, a life that functions. He looked up at him steadily. I would hate to see all of that complicated by a misunderstanding about what you think you've read in a set of freight records. Is that a threat? Ethan said. It's an observation, Whitmore said, about how easily things can become complicated when people start asking questions that go beyond their particular expertise. My expertise, Ethan said, is knowing when my name has been used for something it shouldn't have been, and acting accordingly. He looked down at Whitmore from the top of the porch steps. I've been at this ranch for 15 years, Caleb, longer than you've been operating in this territory. The people who work for me have been with me for most of that time. The men whose names are on my freight records know what they signed and what they didn't. And every piece of documentation I have is going to make very interesting reading for certain people in Helena. A very long pause. You sent someone, Whitmore said. It was not a question. Already gone, Ethan said. The calculation in Whitmore's eyes ran through several iterations in the space of about 3 seconds. Ethan could almost watch it. The man was not stupid. He had built a large and complicated operation over many years, and he had maintained it and protected it through a combination of carefully applied pressure, well-timed generosity, and the ability to read situations fast. He was reading this one fast. Whatever that woman told you, Whitmore said. And now the voice had a new quality in it, still controlled, but with something underneath that was not quite cold enough to be called dangerous and not quite warm enough to be called anything else. You need to understand that she has reasons for what she's saying that have nothing to do with the truth. Her brother was a troubled young man who made accusations he couldn't substantiate and left the territory when he understood that. She's looking for someone to blame for the fact that her family fell apart. Something moved through Ethan that was absolutely not going to be visible on his face. She told me you'd say something like that, he said. Whitmore blinked. Once. She said when he runs out of charm, he'll come for credibility. He'll try to make the truth sound like grievance. Ethan looked at him. She's a smart woman, Caleb. You made a very significant mistake leaving her alive. The door behind Ethan opened. Anna stepped out onto the porch. She stood beside Ethan and looked down at Caleb Whitmore, and she said nothing. She just looked at him. The bruise on her face was full and dark in the afternoon light. Her wrapped wrists were visible below her sleeves. The split lip was still there. She stood straight, and she didn't shake, and she looked at the man who had ordered her locked in a room to die as though she was not afraid of him in the slightest. Which she wasn't. That was the thing that Whitmore had never been able to predict about her, that none of the men who thought in terms of what physical force could accomplish had ever been able to predict about her. She could be hurt. She had been hurt. She would carry the marks of it for a long time, but she had never once been afraid. The calculation in Whitmore's eyes ran one more time. You should think very carefully, he said, about what you're doing. We have, Anna said. Her voice was very quiet. We've thought about it quite carefully. We've thought about Daniel. We've thought about Peters. We've thought about 43 names in a medical folder and every family that's been waiting for a letter that never came. A pause. Have you thought about it? Mr. Whitmore carefully. Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ethan. This isn't finished, he said. No. Ethan agreed. It isn't. But it started. Whitmore picked up his horse's reins. He mounted with the ease of a man who has practiced at leaving situations gracefully, even when they have not gone his way. He turned the horse. Then he stopped with his back to them and said without turning around, "You think you're the first people to try this?" "No," Ethan said. "We're not." "Then you know how it usually ends. For the people who tried it alone with no documentation and no one outside who knew what they knew," Ethan said. "Yes, I know how that ends. That's not what this is." A short silence. Whitmore rode. He didn't look back. Ethan and Anna stood on the porch and watched him go, and neither of them moved until the sound of the horse faded completely. Then Thomas's voice came from inside. "He's going to go straight to the camp." "Yes," Ethan said. He was already turning. Hawk was in the doorway. He had been there for the last several minutes, which Ethan had known, and Whitmore had not. "I heard," he said. "We move tonight." "Tonight," Ethan confirmed. "That changes the plan considerably," Thomas said. "The plan was always going to change," Hawk said. "Plans do." He looked at Ethan. "The ridge approach in the dark is harder, but not impossible. I know the terrain well enough." "Collins," Ethan said. She appeared from the interior of the house. "Ready," she said. She had her medical bag in her hand, which told him she had already packed it before Whitmore had finished his first sentence on the porch. "Anna." He turned to her. She was already moving back inside. "I know," she said. "I'll get my things." He caught her arm gently as she passed. She stopped and looked up at him. "Whatever we find in that camp," he said. "Whatever shape things are in, we don't stop. We keep moving." She understood what he meant by it. He was talking about Daniel. He was telling her that whatever they found, she had to stay operational. For everyone else in that camp, not just her brother. She had to be Anna Whitmore who kept moving, not Anna Whitmore who stopped because she loved someone and that someone was hurt. She knew all of this already. But she looked at him, and the fact that he'd said it without saying it directly, without making her name the thing she was afraid of, without forcing her to perform a strength she was already carrying. She looked at him, and something moved in her eyes that had no name and didn't need one. "I know," she said. He let go of her arm. She went inside. The ranch became a controlled, fast-moving thing after that. Men checking rifles, saddling horses, exchanging few words, because few were necessary. Hawk had his map out again, going over the ridge route one more time with the Drummond brothers. Collins was reorganizing her medical bag with a methodical speed that suggested she had done this kind of packing under time pressure before and knew exactly what order to do it in. Ethan went to his desk one last time. He wrote one more letter. Short. He addressed it to the 4 men whose names he had circled the night before, combined into a single document. He told them what was happening, where they were going, what they expected to find. He told them that if they did not hear from him within 5 days, they should take the copy of the documentation he was enclosing. He had kept one copy back for exactly this purpose and act on it. He sealed it. He gave it to the youngest hand, a boy named Ellis, who was 17 and quick, and was the best pure rider on the property. "You don't stop," Ethan told him, "for anything." "Yes, sir," Ellis said, and was gone before the sentence was fully out. Ethan stood in his office for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds alone in the room where he had made every significant decision of the last 15 years. Where he had signed the papers for the first acres of land. Where he had sat the night Claire died and tried to understand how to be a man who had no one left to come home to. He looked at the framed photograph on the shelf. Claire standing in front of the original ranch house in the second year, shading her eyes from the sun with one hand and laughing at something the photographer had said. She had always laughed at things that other people stood on ceremony about. She had thought ceremony was a waste of time that could be spent on the actual business of living. He looked at her for 5 full seconds. Then he picked up his hat and his rifle and walked out of the office and didn't look back. Outside the group was assembled. 14 men, plus Hawk and Thomas and Anna and Collins. 17 people total going into the dark on horses toward a valley that didn't appear on any map to find 43 people whose families had given up expecting to see them. Ethan mounted his horse. He looked at the group assembled around him. Faces he had known for years. Faces he had known for 2 days. All of them here for different reasons that arrived at the same place. "We stay together until the pass," he said. At the pass, Hawk takes the ridge group northeast. That's Hawk, Anna Collins, Thomas Pete, and 3 of the hands. The rest come with me through the pass approach. We time it so both groups arrive in position within the same half-hour window. He looked around. "We're going in to bring people out. That is the job. Not to punish anyone, not to satisfy anything personal. Get the people out. Secure the evidence we find on site. Get everyone back out the same way we came in." He paused. Questions. Nobody spoke. "All right," he said. They rode out. The Montana sky above them was wide and dark and full of stars. The kind of sky that makes a person feel simultaneously very small and somehow braced by the vastness of it. Like the scale of the world is not meant to diminish you, but to remind you that the thing you're doing matters in a proportion you can't fully see yet. Ethan rode at the front and did not look back at the ranch. Anna rode in the group behind him slightly to the left of Hawk, and she did not look back either. Both of them were looking forward at the dark ahead, at the thing that was coming, that they had been moving toward, from the moment a locked door opened in a supply room, and a frightened, furious, indestructible woman had said her name. 3 days' hard ride northeast. A valley that didn't appear on any map. And 43 people who had never stopped waiting to be found. They rode through the first night without stopping. Hawk set the pace, and it was hard, not reckless, but the kind of sustained speed that asks everything of a horse and a rider over hours. The kind that leaves no room for conversation or distraction, or anything except staying in the saddle and watching the terrain and trusting the person in front of you to know where they're going. The stars were thick enough to navigate by. Hawk navigated by them without appearing to think about it the way a man does things. He has done so many times, they have sunk below the level of conscious decision and become something more like instinct. Anna rode without complaint. Thomas rode without complaint. Collins rode with the focused grimness of a woman who had decided that her body's objections to a hard night ride were simply not relevant information right now and had filed them accordingly. Ethan rode at the head of the main group on the parallel route, Cal Drummond beside him, and he did not speak much either. He had a lot to think about, and thinking required quiet, and the dark and the rhythm of the horse beneath him provided both. He thought about the approach. He thought about timing. He thought about the 15 men riding with him and what he was asking of them, and whether he had prepared them adequately for what they were going to find at the end of this. He thought about Anna and the Ridge Group, and trusted Hawk's knowledge of the terrain, the way you trust someone who has demonstrated through every word and action in the past 2 days that they do not say things they are not certain of. Mostly, he thought about what Whitmore had said on the porch. "You think you're the first people to try this." He had said it like a fact, like history, like something that had happened enough times that it had stopped being a specific event and become a category of things that happened and then were managed and then were forgotten. Ethan had been building in this territory for 15 years. He had been careful and methodical and honest, and he had not allowed himself to be drawn into other people's conflicts, because he had told himself that his job was to build something durable and lasting, and that required a particular kind of focused attention that had no room for the messiness of other people's crises. He understood now what that particular discipline had cost, not just what it had allowed Whitmore to do in its shadow, but what it had cost him personally. Claire had known. She had always known. She had tried to tell him in the gentle, persistent way she had of saying things that were important, by saying them quietly and often, and waiting for him to be ready. She had said, "Ethan, a man who builds only for himself, builds something that ends with him." He had not been ready to hear it then. He was ready now. By the second morning, they were deep into the hills, and the terrain had changed into something rougher and more closed in, and Hawk had slowed the pace because the ground required it. He signaled the split at a fork in a dry creek bed. The ridge group peeled off. Northeast, the pass group continued east, and for a moment Ethan and Anna were side by side at the fork, and they looked at each other. She said nothing. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said, and some things that had never been said at all, but were present in the air between them as clearly as if they had been spoken. He gave her a single nod. She returned it. And then she turned her horse and followed Hawk into the dark, and he turned his horse and led his group toward the pass. The pass was exactly as Hawk had described it. Narrow one way in a natural bottleneck that any operation in that valley would rely on as its primary defense. 2 men at the entrance could hold off 20 if they chose their position well. Ethan had planned for this. What he had planned was loud, deliberate, and calculated to pull every able body in that camp toward the front. He looked at Cal. Ready. Cal checked the rifle in his hands. Been ready since you told us about those 43 names, he said. Ethan raised his hand, held it, waited for what his gut told him was the right amount of time for the ridge group to have gotten into position. Then he brought it down. They rode in hard and fast and loud because that was the point. Because every guard who turned toward the sound of 14 horses coming through that pass was a guard who was not watching the ridge, and what came over the ridge behind them needed exactly that much space to work in. The camp was larger than Ethan had pictured from the descriptions. He registered this in the first 10 seconds buildings, more than he expected the sound of shouting in at least 2 directions, the sight of men scrambling up from positions around fires that had been burning low. Whitmore's men, armed, reacting with the speed of people who had been told something was coming but had not quite believed it would arrive this fast. 3 of them moved toward Ethan's group immediately. The next 5 minutes were the kind of minutes that afterward a man can only recall in pieces, sharp, specific images, separated by the noise and urgency of everything happening at once. Cal taking down a man who had gotten to his rifle first. Pete moving to block the approach to the central building with 2 of the hands flanking him. The sound of gunfire sharp and shocking in the enclosed valley coming from the ridge direction, which meant Hawk's group was in and moving. Ethan dismounted and moved forward and did not stop moving. There was a man in front of him who raised a weapon, and he dealt with that directly and efficiently and without anything extra and moved on. There was a second man who thought better of the situation when he saw what was happening to the first, and dropped his weapon and put his hands up, and Ethan left Curtis to handle him and kept moving. I was looking for the central building, the largest one, the one that in any operation like this held the records, held the authority, held the person ultimately responsible, if the person responsible was on site. He had a strong... Whitmore had gotten here first. He was right. The door to the central building was open, and the inside was in partial disarray, papers on the floor. A desk chair knocked over the specific disorder of someone who had arrived in a hurry and gone through things in a hurry and tried to take what mattered most and leave before anyone could stop them. Ethan went in fast and swept the room. Empty, but not entirely stripped. Whitmore had taken what he could carry and left what he couldn't, and what he'd left was still enough ledger's correspondence, a strong box that had been opened but not fully emptied. Letters with territorial official seals on them that told a very specific story about where money had been going and why certain questions had never been asked. He grabbed everything that was left and moved back outside. What he came out to was not the chaos he had left. It was something closer to its aftermath. Whitmore's men, the ones still standing, had mostly given up. Some had run into the hills and the Drummond brothers, and 2 of the hands were already moving to track them, not urgently, because they weren't going anywhere that mattered. The rest were sitting on the ground with their hands visible and the particular expression of men who had been confident in their situation until approximately 40 minutes ago and were still processing the adjustment. And coming around the far side of the central building from the direction of the ridge were Hawk and Thomas and Collins and Anna. Collins was already at work. She hadn't stopped moving since she came over the ridge. She was with the people being held, the ones being brought out of the structures in the eastern part of the camp, and she was assessing and directing with a calm, rapid authority that silenced even the men around her who hadn't known quite what a frontier doctor looked like when she was doing her actual job. Anna was not with Collins. Anna was standing very still about 30 feet away at the entrance to one of the smaller structures, and she was not moving, which was the only thing about her that told Ethan something had happened. He crossed the distance between them fast. She heard him coming and turned. Her face was not the face he had learned to read over the past 2 days. Something was different in it. Something had broken open, but not in the devastating way he had feared. In something more complicated than that. "He's alive," she said. The two words came out with a weight behind them that was not relief so much as the release of something she had been holding up through sheer force of will for so long that putting it down was physically disorienting. "He's alive," she said again. Ethan stopped in front of her. "Where?" She stepped back and let him see through the doorway. Inside, on a rough cot against the far wall, was a young man who looked like he had been through something that had tried its level best to finish him. Thin in the way people get when they've been underfed for months. A beard he hadn't had when he'd arrived from the photographs Anna had described. His left arm was wrapped in cloth that needed changing. His eyes were open, and he was looking at Anna with an expression that Ethan would not have been able to put words to, even if someone had asked him to. "You came," Daniel said. His voice was rough and low from disuse. "Obviously," Anna said, and the word came out with the same dry, almost wry quality that Ethan had heard in the supply room when she'd been barely conscious and bleeding and making small observations about her own survival. She was still herself, even here, even now. She went to her brother and sat on the edge of the cot and took his hand in her wrapped hands and did not say anything else for a moment. She didn't need to. The hand-holding said everything that the words would have taken too long to carry. Ethan stood in the doorway and gave them 30 seconds. Then he said quietly, "Collins is going to need to look at him." "I know," Anna said without turning. "Give me 1 more minute." He gave her 2. Outside the camp was coming into a kind of rough order. The people being held, 31 of them, the Drummond brothers had already done a count. More than 31 had been here, but some had been moved recently within the past week, which meant Whitmore had begun the process of clearing out before Ethan's group had arrived, were being gathered in the central area, while Collins moved between them with her bag and her steady, unsentimental competence. 31. Not 43. 31. The other 12 had been moved in the week since Whitmore had seen the situation turning. Ethan did not yet know where. He filed that away in the category of things to pursue, and stood in the middle of the camp and thought about what needed to happen in the next several hours. Thomas appeared beside him. He looked tired in a deep way, the way men look when they've been carrying guilt for a long time and have just done something that doesn't erase it, but begins the work of addressing it. "They were going to move everyone within the next 2 days," he said. "One of Whitmore's men told me before he stopped being cooperative. Said the order came down yesterday. Whitmore knew we were coming. He came to the ranch to buy time," Ethan said. Not with anger, just as a plain recognition of what had happened. The visit was a delay. He was hoping to slow us down long enough to clear this place out. "It almost worked," Thomas said. "Almost." Ethan agreed. He looked around the camp, at the 31 people who were here, at Collins moving between them with purposeful calm, at Hawk standing near the ridge approach, watching the hills with the alert stillness that was simply his natural state, at the Drummond brothers, organizing the hands into a perimeter that said, "This is over. Everyone here is safe. We are not leaving until everyone leaves together." "Where is Whitmore?" he asked. Thomas shook his head. "Not here. He got here before us, went through the records, and rode out. He had maybe a 4-hour head start on us at most." "Direction?" "North," Thomas said. "That's what one of his men said. North." Ethan thought about this. North meant the upper territory. North meant space and distance and the kind of geography where a man with money and a horse and a destination in mind could make himself very difficult to find for a period of time. North was not where the Territorial Records Office was. North was not where the 4 men whose names Ethan had circled were waiting with copies of the documentation, which meant Whitmore was running. For the first time in however long he had been building this operation, Caleb Whitmore was running. That was the moment Ethan understood that what they had done had worked. Not finished, not resolved, not the clean ending that stories sometimes permitted themselves, but worked in the sense that the operation was broken, the people were out, the records were in hand, and the man who had built it all had just made the decision that exposed him completely, because men who have done nothing wrong do not ride north at 4 in the morning. He was still thinking about what needed to happen next when Anna appeared beside him. She looked steadier. Not fine was not a word that applied to this situation, but the kind of steadier that comes from finding what you came to find and being able to hold it. Daniel needs Collins immediately, she said. His arm is infected. She says it's manageable, but it needs attention now. Collins is already moving, Ethan said. He had seen her heading toward the smaller structure as he came out of it. Anna nodded. She stood beside him and looked at the camp the way he had been looking at it, not at any specific thing, but at all of it. The scope of it. The scale of what had been happening here. 31, she said quietly. 31, he confirmed. The other 12. Whitmore moved them before we got here. We'll find them. He said this with certainty, because uncertainty was not useful right now, and because he meant it. She looked at him. You sound sure. The documentation we have from this building, he said, combined with what Margaret is carrying to Helena and what the 4 men I wrote to are holding Whitmore, has nowhere to take this, that it doesn't follow him. He can run north for 6 months. When he comes back, or when someone finds him, the case is already built. He paused. The other 12 people are somewhere on a route that's documented. We'll trace it. Anna was quiet for a moment. I want to be there when he's found. I know you do, he said. I'm not asking your permission, she said. I know that too, he said, and there was something in the way he said it that was different from the way he'd said things to her before. Not firmer, not softer, but somehow more at ease. Like he had stopped translating her independence as something to navigate around and had simply accepted it as the fact it was. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then she looked back at the camp. Collins needs more supplies than she brought, she said. Some of these people haven't had adequate food or clean water for weeks. She can stabilize them, but they need real care, real facilities. We move everyone out today, Ethan said. Back to the ranch first. It's the closest place with adequate space and resources. From there, Collins directs whatever medical response is needed, and we start the process of contacting families. Families, Anna repeated. The word had a different weight when she said it. Do you know how long some of these people have been here? Some of the records go back 2 years, he said. A silence. 2 years, she said. Yes. She breathed in slowly. Let it out. Steadied herself with the same practiced efficiency she brought to everything. Then we better start moving, she said. They started moving. The logistics of extracting 31 people in various states of physical condition from a remote valley and getting them back to a working ranch 3 days right away was not simple. Ethan did not pretend it was simple. He organized it the way he organized everything systematically, with attention to what each person needed and what each available resource could provide, and with the understanding that the job was going to take longer than he wanted it to, and he needed to accept that and work within it rather than against it. Collins triaged. She divided the 31 into 3 groups, those who could ride with assistance, those who needed to be transported in the camp's own wagon, which was large and serviceable. The wagon had been used for exactly the opposite purpose until about 2 hours ago, and repurposing it was the kind of practical justice that required no commentary. Hawk organized the riding groups. Thomas helped. The Drummond brothers coordinated the hands with the quiet authority of men who understood what was needed without being told 3 times. Daniel Whitmore, his arm wrapped in clean cloth from Collins's bag, was helped onto a horse by Anna and by Pete Drummond. He was weak, but he was upright. He held the reins himself. His sister watched him do it with an expression that was not quite pride and not quite relief, and was perhaps some emotion that existed between the two and had no single name. He looked at her when he was settled. Anna, he said, the records I kept, before they took everything. I know, she said. We have records, more than you had. We have everything. He looked at her hands, the cloth wrapping. What happened to you? Later, she said. Right now we ride. Always was bossy, he said, and his voice had the weak echo of something that in other circumstances might have been the particular teasing tone of a younger sibling. And Anna looked at him with the specific exasperation of an older one, and something cracked open in both their faces at once that was not quite a smile, and was the most human thing that had happened in that valley all morning. Ethan turned away to give them the moment. I was going through the records he'd pulled from the central building, organizing them into what needed to go to Helena immediately versus what could wait. He was in the middle of this when one of the hands young Curtis came to him with a look on his face that was new. Not the grim competence of the last several hours. Something more uncertain. Mr. Caldwell, Curtis said. There's a man. One of Whitmore's men, one that gave up early. He's been asking to talk to you specifically. Ethan looked up. About what? Says he's got information about where the other 12 people were moved. Says he'll give it in exchange for... Curtis stopped. He says he wants to testify. Says he wants someone to know he gave them up, that he tried to make it right. Ethan set down the records. Where is he? The man was sitting against the exterior wall of one of the outbuildings, hands tied in front of him, young 25 at most, with the particular look of someone who had made a series of bad decisions over a number of years and was having in this moment the clearest possible view of where that series had deposited him. He looked up when Ethan approached. Mr. Caldwell, he said. That's right. My name's Deacon, the man said. I've worked for Whitmore going on 2 years. I signed on thinking it was freight work. By the time I understood what it really was, I was in deep enough that... He stopped, started again. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I don't deserve it, and I'm not looking for it. I know where he took those 12 people. I know the route, and I know the destination. Tell me, Ethan said. I need something in return, Deacon said. Not immunity, not I'm not asking to walk away from this. I know I'm not walking away from this. He looked at Ethan steadily. I want to testify. I want it on record that I gave the information and that I cooperated. That's all. Ethan looked at him for a moment. You'll have that, he said. Whatever I have the ability to vouch for, I'll vouch for. Deacon gave him the route. He gave him the destination, a settlement 3 days south, a different operation connected to Whitmore's network that was large enough to absorb 12 people without appearing to change size at all. He gave him a contact name. He gave him enough that Ethan could see the thread and knew how to follow it. When he was done, he looked at his hands and said nothing. You made a choice, Ethan said. That matters. Little late, Deacon said. That doesn't make it smaller, Ethan said. He left Deacon with Curtis and went back to the main group. The convoy was almost ready to move. 31 people organized into riding groups and the wagon. 16 of Ethan's own people. Collins already on her horse with her medical bag resecured. Hawk at the front. Thomas beside him. Anna rode back to him as he mounted. Ready, she said. One development, he said. He told her about Deacon. He told her the destination where the other 12 had been taken. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, That's 3 days south. Yes. After we get these people to the ranch, she said. We go south. Yes, he said. And then because it needed to be said, not we necessarily. You'll have your brother too. Ethan, she said. He stopped. Daniel is going to be all right, she said. Collins will see to that. Margaret will be back from Helena by the time we reach the ranch and she'll help. My brother is alive and he is going to be fine, and I am going with you south. She held his gaze. Don't argue with me about this. He looked at her. At the absolute clarity in her face, not the desperate clarity of someone who is avoiding a feeling by replacing it with action, but the genuine clarity of someone who has found what they came to find and is ready to keep going because there are still people who haven't been found yet. I'm not going to argue with you, he said. Good, she said. They rode out of the valley, all of them together through the narrow pass and into the wider country beyond, and Ethan did not look back at the camp. He had no need to. What had happened there was finished. What came next was not. The ride back to the ranch took the better part of 2 days. They moved as fast as the wagon allowed, which was not fast, but Collins used the time the way she used all time productively, moving between people, doing what could be done with what she had, making notes about what would be needed when they arrived. The people from the camp were quiet for the most part. Not broken quiet, not the silence of people who had given up, but the tentative, careful quiet of people who had not yet fully processed the fact that the thing they had been enduring was over, and were not quite ready to believe it until they were somewhere completely different. Ethan rode alongside the wagon for long stretches, and spoke to them when they spoke to him, and listened when they needed to talk, and did not offer anything beyond his presence, when presence was what was needed. He was not naturally a man of many words, and the people in that wagon were not in those hours looking for words. They were looking for the proof that the world contained people who moved toward them instead of away. And he offered that proof in the only language that had always been reliable. He showed up, he stayed, he kept moving forward. Daniel rode near Anna for most of the return journey. He was weak enough that he needed periodic help with the reins, when his arm bothered him, and he accepted this help with the particular grace of someone who had been through enough to understand that needing help was not the same as being helpless. He and Anna spoke in low voices that Ethan didn't try to hear. They were reconstructing something between them piece by piece, the way you rebuild a structure that's been damaged carefully, with attention to what still holds and what needs replacing. On the evening of the second day, as the Caldwell Ranch came into view, something happened that Ethan had not anticipated. One of the women from the camp, a woman named Rose, who had not spoken once in 2 days of riding, who had sat in the wagon with her arms wrapped around herself and her eyes forward, and had not cried, and had not asked for anything, looked up as the ranch appeared on the horizon and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Is that it?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said. She looked at it for a long moment. "It looks safe," she said. He felt something in his chest at that, something that had no clean name and didn't need one. "It is," he said. She nodded, wrapped her arms a little less tightly around herself, and looked forward. That was when Ethan understood something he had been building toward without knowing it for the last several days. The ranch had always been his land, his work, his life, his monument to 15 years of building something alone. The place that represented everything he had accomplished and everything he had retreated into. But Rose had looked at it and said it looked safe. And what he felt was not the pride of an owner. It was something more like purpose. The convoy rolled through the ranch gates in the last light of the evening, and the hands who had stayed behind came out to meet them. And there was the organized, efficient business of getting 31 people fed and sheltered and attended to. Margaret had returned from Helena. She had come back that morning, which meant Ethan's documentation was in James Hartley's hands, and whatever happened next happened with that knowledge in the world. She took one look at the convoy coming through the gate and walked straight to Collins and said, "Tell me what you need." And Collins told her, and they went to work together with the brisk mutual competence of two women who had each spent decades solving problems that nobody had thought to prepare them for. Ethan stood by the gate as the last of the wagon came through and watched his property fill with people it had never held before. He thought about what he was going to do with it. The thought was not entirely formed yet, but the shape of it was there in the way the shape of something is visible before the details are clear. He was still standing there when Anna came to him. "Hartley has everything," he said before she could speak. He'd spoken to Margaret briefly. "The 4 men I wrote to have been in contact with each other and with the territorial court. There will be a hearing within the week." He paused. "It's moving." "I know," she said. "Margaret told me." A pause. "Whitmore. Still north," he said. "But with what we now have and what Deacon is willing to say, there's nowhere north enough." He looked at her. "He's finished Anna. He doesn't know it yet, but he's finished." She was quiet for a moment. "My brother asked me something on the ride back," she said. He waited. "He asked me how I found you," she said. "I mean how I ended up here with you with all of this." She glanced up at him sideways. "I told him I didn't find you, that you found me." "That's accurate," he said. "He asked if I thought it was luck," she said. "What did you tell him?" She was quiet for a beat. "I told him I didn't believe in luck. I believed in people who choose not to walk away when they find a locked door. She looked at him directly now. And that the rest of it was just what happened when two people like that end up at the same door at the same time. Ethan held her gaze. Something moved between them that had been building since a supply room in a mountain trading post, since the moment a frightened, furious, indestructible woman had told him her name in the dark, and then refused to accept anything less than being treated as exactly who she was. He said, "We still have 12 people to find." "I know," she said. 3 days south." "I know that too. We leave in 2 days. Give Collins time to stabilize everyone here. Give Daniel time to be seen properly. Give Margaret time to get what she needs from Hartley about the legal process, so we know what we're walking into." He paused. "And give yourself 1 day to rest." She opened her mouth. "Anna," he said. She closed it. "1 day," he said. "You've been running on nothing for too long. The 12 people south aren't going anywhere in the next 48 hours that we can't follow. 1 day." A very long pause. "Fine," she said. The same word the same way as that first morning when he'd said he was carrying her to his horse and she'd decided not to fight it. The word that meant she was choosing her battles and had determined this was not one of them. He almost smiled. Inside the ranch house, Daniel was being settled into the room next to Anna's with Margaret directing and Collins supervising, and the particular domestic authority of 2 experienced women, organizing a sick man's comfort in a way that left the sick man very little choice in the matter. Thomas was with the hands helping organize the new arrivals. Hawk was doing what Hawk did, which was standing somewhere on the edges of things and watching everything and missing nothing. Curtis came to find Ethan before he went inside. "Deacon is asking what happens to him," he said. "Practically, I mean. He's been cooperative, but he stays here for now," Ethan said. "Under watch, but treated decently. When the hearing happens, his cooperation gets noted. What the court does with that is the court's business, not mine." Curtis nodded. "He also said to tell you—" He stopped. "He said to tell you he's sorry. About all of it. Didn't think you'd care, but wanted to say it anyway." Ethan thought about that. "Tell him sorry is a starting point," he said. "What he does after this is what matters." He went inside. The ranch was full of people and sound, and the particular organized energy of a place that was being used for something larger than it had been designed for, and Ethan walked through all of it to his office, and sat down for the first time in what felt like several lifetimes, and simply sat there for a moment in the quiet. On the desk in front of him was a single piece of paper that Margaret had placed there at some point. A response from James Hartley and Helena, written fast clearly in the hours after Margaret arrived and before she rode back. He read it. Hartley had the documentation. The 4 men Ethan had written to were already in contact with the court. There would be a formal hearing. Warrants were being prepared for Caleb Whitmore's arrest. And at the bottom, in Hartley's careful, formal hand, was a single additional sentence that had nothing to do with legal process. It said, "Your wife would have been proud of what you've done today. I knew Claire. She always said you'd find your way back to what mattered. She was right. She usually was." Ethan read that sentence twice. He set the paper down. He sat in his office in the ranch that Claire had never seen, finished, surrounded by people she would have moved heaven and earth to help. At the end of a thing she would have believed in from the first moment someone told her it needed doing. He didn't cry. He was not in the ordinary course of things a man who cried. But something settled in him. Something that had been tight and held and careful for a very long time, released just slightly, like a knot, loosening a single degree, and the feeling was so unfamiliar and so welcome and so much like something he had given up expecting that he had to sit with it for a moment before he could move again. He sat with it. Then he got up because there was still work to do. There always was. And for the first time in 15 years, that was not a burden. It was exactly what he wanted. The 1 day of rest lasted exactly 18 hours before Anna was back at the dining room table with papers spread in front of her, and Collins sitting across from her, comparing medical notes against Deacon's route information. Ethan walked in at 6 in the morning, found them both there, and did not say a single word about the agreement they had made the night before. He simply poured himself coffee, pulled up a chair, and joined them. Margaret watched this from the doorway, said nothing, and went back to the kitchen. Daniel came down the hall an hour later, moving slowly and favoring his left arm, but moving under his own power, which Collins noted with professional satisfaction, and Anna noted with the particular expression of someone who is relieved but refuses to make a production of it. He sat down at the table and looked at the papers spread across it and said, "Tell me where we are." So they told him. All of it from the moment Anna had found the ledgers to the moment Deacon had given up the southern route to last night's communication from James Hartley in Helena. Daniel listened without interrupting, which told Ethan a great deal about the young man's character. He had been through months of something terrible, and he had come out of it still capable of listening before he spoke. When they finished, Daniel sat quietly for a moment. 12 people south, he said. Yes, Anna said. And Whitmore is running north. Yes. Daniel looked at Ethan. The warrants Hartley mentioned. How long before they're active? Days, Ethan said. Maybe less. Hartley moves fast when he's motivated, and right now he has every reason to move fast. Whitmore has money, Daniel said. He has contacts north. If he gets far enough past the territorial boundary, a warrant from Helena. Won't reach, Ethan finished. I know. A silence fell over the table. Then we have a problem, Daniel said. We have a situation, Ethan said. Not the same thing. He looked at the route information Deacon had given them, laid out in Anna's precise handwriting across 3 pages. We go south, we find the 12, we bring them back. That's the priority. Whitmore running north does not change what those 12 people need right now. But if he gets out of reach, Daniel started. He won't, Hawk said. Everyone looked up. Hawk had come in so quietly that at least 3 people at the table had not registered his arrival. He was standing near the doorway with a cup of coffee in one hand, and his particular quality of having been there longer than anyone realized. You know something, Ethan said. I know where he's going, Hawk said. North has 2 options for a man with money trying to cross out of territorial reach. The pass at Granger's Crossing, which takes 3 days but is the easier route. Or the Meridian Trail, which cuts 2 days off but is brutal in summer. He paused. Whitmore is a man who values his comfort. He'll take Granger's Crossing. And, Ethan said. And I know a man at Granger's Crossing, Hawk said. A trapper named Aldous. Been stationed up there for 11 years. He knows every rider who comes through. And he owes me a significant favor from a situation 4 years ago that I won't go into detail about. He looked around the table. If I send word to Aldous today, Whitmore walks into a man who can delay him long enough for the warrant to reach Granger's jurisdiction. Thomas leaned forward. Can you get word there in time? Already sent it, Hawk said. The table went completely silent. When? Ethan asked. Last night, Hawk said. While everyone was getting settled. I took one of your fast horses and rode to the relay station 12 miles east. The message is moving. He took a sip of his coffee with the absolute calm of someone who had done what needed doing and saw no reason to make a theatrical event of it. I figured it was worth doing regardless of whether anyone agreed. If it doesn't work, we've lost nothing. If it does. Whitmore stops, Anna said. Whitmore stops. Hawk agreed. Daniel stared at him. You did that last night. Someone had to, Hawk said simply. Daniel looked at his sister. Anna was looking at Hawk with an expression that contained among other things the particular recognition of someone encountering a quality they deeply respect in a person they had not fully understood yet. All right, Ethan said. He set down his coffee. We ride south this morning. Hawk, you stay here. You've been on horseback for 3 days, solid, and I need someone with your eyes watching this property and these people while we're gone. Hawk didn't argue, which coming from Hawk was the clearest possible agreement. Thomas comes with us, Anna said. It wasn't a question. Thomas looked up. Wasn't planning on staying behind, he said. Collins, Ethan said. She was already packing her bag. Obviously, she said, which was becoming her standard response to questions about her participation in things. Daniel. Ethan looked at him directly. You're not riding south. Daniel opened his mouth. You're the most important witness we have, Ethan said before he could form the argument. Everything you documented, everything you saw, everything you can testify to your credibility as a witness is the spine of the legal case. If something happens to you on a southern route before the hearing, we lose that." He paused. "I need you here rested and ready to stand in front of a court and say exactly what you saw. That's not a lesser job. That's the job." Daniel looked at his sister. She looked back at him with an expression that said, "He's right, and you know it, and I'm not going to make it easier by arguing on your behalf." Daniel looked back at Ethan. "Fine," he said. The word landed differently than when Anna said it. Hers always contained a kind of strategic acceptance. His contained something younger, not quite surrender, not quite agreement, but the recognition that he was in the company of people who were thinking 3 moves ahead, and he was still catching up. They rode south within the hour. The southern route was different terrain than what they'd crossed going to the valley. Flatter, more open, longer stretches where you could see a long way and be seen equally far. Ethan moved them at a pace that balanced speed with the need to arrive in condition to be useful rather than exhausted. Thomas rode beside Anna for a stretch in the late morning, and Ethan a few lengths ahead could hear them talking without being able to make out the words. He didn't try to. Whatever they were saying was theirs. Thomas had worked with Daniel. He had things to tell Anna about her brother's months in that camp. Things that were probably not easy to hear, and she was hearing them with the same steady attention she brought to everything that mattered. Collins rode beside Ethan. She was quiet for a while, and then she said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask," he said. "When you found her," Collins said, "in that supply room, what made you stay?" He thought about it honestly, the way he always did with honest questions. "She was breathing," he said, "and then she told me her name." Collins looked at him. "That's all?" "That's all," he said. "She was a person. She told me her name. Everything after that was just—" He paused. "Logic." Collins was quiet for a moment. "You know that's not normal," she said. "Most men would have gone for the sheriff. Most men in this territory," he said carefully, "would have found the nearest authority and handed the problem off and been back to their regular business by noon. And the problem would have quietly disappeared within 48 hours, and no one would ever have known." He looked ahead at the trail. "I knew that, so I made a different choice." "Just like that," she said. "It wasn't particularly complicated," he said, and he meant it. It genuinely had not been complicated. The complexity had come after. The choice itself had been the simplest thing he'd done in years. A locked door. A breathing person. An obvious next step. Collins shook her head slightly. "I've been a doctor in this territory for 9 years," she said. "I have treated more people than I can count, who were hurt by people more powerful than them, and had nowhere to go, and no one coming. I have kept records for 7 months because I didn't know what else to do with what I knew." She paused. "I want you to understand something. What you did, not just the camp, not just the planning and the resources and the riding, but the very first thing. Finding her and choosing not to walk away. That's where all of this started, that one choice." Ethan said nothing. "I just wanted to say it plainly," Collins said. "Because I think sometimes people do a significant thing, and it gets absorbed into the larger story, and the starting point gets lost." He rode with that for a while. They reached the southern settlement on the afternoon of the 3rd day. It was called Harrow Creek, a working settlement medium-sized, with the appearance of ordinary frontier commerce, doing ordinary frontier business. Deacon's information had given them a contact name, a man named Greer, who ran a supply operation on the eastern edge of the settlement, and who served as the local coordinator for Whitmore's southern network. Ethan had thought carefully about how to approach this. The direct approach, riding in with force. The way they'd gone into the valley would not work here. This was not a remote camp in an unmapped valley. This was a populated settlement with ordinary citizens going about ordinary lives. Whatever Greer was doing, he was doing it within the cover of normal business, and disrupting that cover with a show of force would endanger innocent people and give Greer time to move whoever he was holding. "We go in quiet," Ethan said when they stopped a mile out. "Thomas Collins and I go into the settlement first." Anna, you... I know, she said. He looked at her. You're going to tell me to wait outside until you've assessed the situation, she said. And you're right. I know the logic. I'm not going to argue with you. He looked at her for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. You're learning to pick your battles, he said. I've always known how to pick my battles, she said. I just usually determine that all of them are worth fighting. A pause. This one I'll concede. But Ethan, if you're not back within 2 hours... We'll be back, he said. He rode into Harrow Creek with Thomas and Collins flanking him, and he moved through it the way he moved through all places steadily without urgency, reading everything around him without appearing to read anything at all. The supply operation Deacon had described was exactly where he said it would be. A large building on the eastern edge, with good wagon access and enough traffic that extra movement wouldn't draw attention. Ethan tied his horse and walked in. The man behind the counter was in his 40s, heavy-set with the professional blankness of someone who had spent years cultivating the appearance of a man with nothing on his mind beyond ordinary business. Help you, he said. Looking for Greer, Ethan said. A pause. Exactly 1 beat too long for a man with nothing to hide. You're looking at him. Good. Ethan put both hands flat on the counter. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I own the Caldwell Ranch north of here. I have documentation that connects your operation to a freight network run by Caleb Whitmore. I have witness testimony from 2 former employees of that network. I have medical records from 43 workers, and I have an active warrant process through the Territorial Records Office in Helena. He looked at Greer steadily. I'm not here to make this complicated. I'm here to ask you one question. The 12 people moved here from the northern camp, where are they? Greer stared at him. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to decide, Ethan said. Whether you answer me or whether you wait for this to become significantly less comfortable for you. Greer looked at Thomas, who said nothing. He looked at Collins, who looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had been documenting his employer's crimes for 7 months and was not particularly impressed. 20 seconds passed. Then Greer reached under the counter. Thomas's hand went to his rifle in the same instant. Greer came up with a ring of keys. He set them on the counter. He said nothing. Ethan picked up the keys. Where? Greer pointed to the back wall. There was a door. The door led to a passage. The passage led to another building behind the first one, connected in a way that from the outside looked like ordinary construction, and from the inside revealed itself as exactly what it was, a holding structure built to look like storage and used for something else entirely. The 12 people were there. Collins went in first. She was in there for a long time. Ethan stood outside the door and listened to her voice moving through the space, low, steady, professional, asking questions and receiving answers and directing the care she was already providing with the materials in her bag and whatever she could source from Greer's legitimate supply stock, which she had already mentally inventoried as she walked through. Thomas was with Greer, who was not going anywhere, and seemed in the way of men who have reached the end of a road. They've been traveling for a while to have arrived at a state of flat, exhausted cooperation. Ethan sent one of the hands he'd brought back to where Anna and the others were waiting. She arrived 8 minutes later. She came in fast, and she went straight past Ethan into the back building without stopping, and he let her go because there was nothing to say at this particular moment that needed to be said out loud. 3 of the 12 were in worse shape than anyone from the valley had been. Collins stayed with them while the others were helped out, and the process of getting everyone organized and mobile began. It was slower this time, more careful. The settlement itself was now involved once the ordinary citizens of Harrow Creek began to understand what had been operating in their community behind a supply business. The response was the particular mixture of outrage and shame that decent people feel when they realize something terrible was happening close enough to touch. A woman named Ruth, who ran the settlement's boarding house, opened her doors without being asked. A man named Harold, who kept the largest building in the settlement, cleared it out within 2 hours for Collins to use as a temporary medical space. People brought food. People brought blankets. People did the things that people do when they are given the opportunity to be useful to other people in genuine distress, which is to say, they did it without being asked twice, and without requiring thanks, and without making it about themselves. This Ethan thought watching it happen around him was also the territory. Not just the Whitmores of it. Not just the men who built operations on silence and fear, and the calculated isolation of people who had no one coming for them. But this too. The Ruth who opened her doors, and the Harold who cleared his building, and the people who brought blankets without being told. Both things were true about the place he had spent 15 years building in. He had been looking at one side of it for too long. Anna found him that evening standing outside the boarding house thinking. "All 12, she said. "Collins says all 12 are going to make it." He let out a breath he hadn't entirely been aware he was holding. "2 of them are brothers," she said. "From a settlement 4 days east of here. Their mother has been looking for them for 14 months. Her voice was perfectly even when she said it. The evenness he had come to understand was not the absence of feeling, but the deliberate management of feeling in service of staying functional. "Collins is going to write to the families. She has a system for it. She told me she'd been writing the notifications in her head for months, waiting for the day she had something real to say instead of just another absence to report. She'll write good letters," Ethan said. "Yes," Anna agreed. They stood together in the quiet of a settlement evening, the sounds of people moving and talking and doing ordinary things drifting around them. After a while, Anna said, "What happens now after this? After Helena? After Whitmore?" Ethan thought about it. He had been thinking about it since Rose had said the ranch looked safe. Since Hartley's letter. Since the moment he had sat in his office and felt something loosen in him that had been tight for 15 years. "The ranch is too large for one man's purposes," he said. "It always has been. I've known that for a while. I just didn't have a direction to point the excess toward." She looked at him. "The people from the camp," he said. "The ones who don't have somewhere immediate to go, or whose somewhere is damaged beyond returning to, or who need time to recover before they can make the next decision about their lives. They can come to the ranch." He paused. "Not as workers, not as charity cases, as people who need a place and time and some stability before they figure out what comes next." Anna was quiet. "There's enough land," he said. "Enough buildings or the ability to build more. Enough work for people who wanted enough space for people who need quiet. Collins could—" He stopped. "If she wanted, if it made sense to her, she could base her practice there. It's more central than Graywood, and the population she'd be serving just grew considerably." "Have you asked her?" Anna said. "Not yet," he said. "I'm telling you first." She looked up at him when he said that. Something in the way he said it telling you first registered in her expression, and she held his gaze for a moment, with the full directness that was always there, but had different qualities, depending on what was underneath it. Right now, what was underneath it was something careful and unhurried and entirely present. "Why are you telling me first?" she said. I thought about how to say it accurately. He was a man who preferred accuracy. "Because what happens to the ranch after this matters to you," he said. "And because what you think about it matters to me." A pause. "And because I think we have more work to do together, and I'd rather know early on whether you're inclined to stay in one place, or whether you're someone who needs to keep moving." She looked at him for a long, steady moment. "I've been moving for a year," she said. "I moved because there was something I needed to find." She held his gaze. "I found it." He held her gaze back. "I'm not suggesting you have nowhere else to be," he said. "And I'm not suggesting anything that you haven't chosen." "I know," she said. "I'm suggesting," he said, "that if you wanted to stay, there's a place here, and work here, and people who need what you know how to do." He paused. "And someone who has found somewhat unexpectedly that he makes better decisions when you're in the room." Anna was quiet for what felt like a long time, but was probably 15 seconds. Then she said, "That might be the least romantic way anyone has ever suggested a thing like this." "I wasn't aware I was," he started. "You were," she said. And something moved in her face that he had not seen there before. Not the wry, near smile, not the direct clarity, not the managed composure. Something warmer and more unguarded than any of those. Something that she apparently had not fully decided to show, and was showing anyway, because she had spent a year being exactly who she was, in exactly the circumstances she was in, and wasn't inclined to start performing now. He said, "Is that a yes?" She said, "It's a not a no, which coming from me you should understand is significant." He understood entirely. The news came 4 days later, when they were 2 days into the return ride north, with all 12 people from Harrow Creek added to the group, and Collins riding with the particular focused energy of a woman who had just decided something large about her own future and was content with the decision. A rider met them on the road. He was from the territorial relay system, and he carried a sealed message addressed to Ethan Caldwell, and he handed it over with the professional neutrality of a man whose job was message delivery and not message content. Ethan read it on horseback. He read it twice. Then he turned and looked back at Anna, who was riding 20 feet behind him. She read his face. "Whitmore," she said. "Aldous held him at Granger's Crossing," Ethan said. 3 days. Said he needed to verify the horse's registration, made up some procedural complication about the crossing permit. Whitmore argued and then tried to bribe him, and Aldous took the bribe and continued to delay him anyway. He paused. The warrant reached Granger's jurisdiction on the second day. They took him into custody yesterday morning. The group around them had gone very quiet. Thomas made a sound. Short, involuntary, the sound of someone who has been carrying the weight of 18 months of guilty knowledge and has just felt a significant portion of it lift. Collins closed her eyes for one moment. The 12 people from Harrow Creek, who had heard the name Caleb Whitmore spoken in fear for however long each of them had been caught in his operation, heard it now in a different context, and the responses moved through them like a wave, not loud, not dramatic, because people who have been through what they had been through often can't access the dramatic response that the moment seems to call for. Instead, it was quiet, collective. The sound and feeling of people releasing a breath they had been holding for a very long time. Rose, who had spoken so quietly when she first saw the ranch and said it looked safe, was riding in the group from the valley. She said nothing now. She just straightened in her saddle in a way she hadn't before, just fractionally, and it was the most expressive thing in the world. Daniel was not there to hear it in person. He was at the ranch preparing for what the hearing in Helena would require of him, and Ethan knew that when word reached him, the response would be its own thing, entirely private and complicated, and his to process in whatever way he needed to. Anna was looking at Ethan. He looked back at her. "Hawk," she said. Not a sentence, just the name. Just the acknowledgement of what Hawk had done the night everyone else was focused on getting settled, when he had quietly taken a horse and ridden 12 miles to send a message to a trapper named Aldous, because someone had to. "Hawk," Ethan agreed. He turned to ride back through the group to where Hawk was as usual positioned at the outer edge of things. Hawk saw him coming and waited. "Aldous came through," Ethan said. "I know," Hawk said. "I got a separate message 2 hours ago from the relay station." "You didn't say anything." "You were managing the group," Hawk said. "Didn't seem like the right moment to interrupt." He looked at Ethan. "I take it you told them." "Just now." Hawk nodded once. The nod of a man who considers the situation resolved and is already thinking about what comes next. "What do you do now?" Ethan asked him. "After this?" Hawk was quiet for a moment. "Depends," he said. "On what?" "On whether the work I just did here generates more work like it," he said, "or whether it was a one-time thing." He looked at Ethan. "There are more operations like Whitmore's in this territory. Maybe not as large, maybe structured differently. But the same principle, men using the frontier's gaps and silences to do things to people who have no voice and no one coming." He paused. "If there were someone with resources and standing who wanted to address that on an ongoing basis, rather than as a single incident, I might be available for that kind of work." Ethan looked at him. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. The hearing in Helena happened 3 weeks later. Ethan was there. Anna was there. Daniel was there, pale and careful with his arm, but standing straight and speaking with a clarity that the courtroom, which had expected a damaged young man barely recovered from months of captivity, had not been prepared for. Collins was there with her folder and her 7 months of medical records and her 9 years of frontier medicine, making everything she said precise and irrefutable. Thomas was there. Deacon was there and said what he had promised to say and said it clearly. Caleb Whitmore was there in the custody of 2 territorial officers, and he looked like a man who had arrived at the end of something and knew it. Not broken exactly, he was too controlled for that, too practiced at managing his own presentation. But the warmth was entirely gone, and what remained was just the calculation, and calculation without warmth has no power to move anyone. I had lawyers, good ones. They did what good lawyers do and argued what could be argued and delayed what could be delayed. But they were working against 4 years of Ethan's freight records, 7 months of Collins's medical documentation, Thomas's first-hand account, Deacon's testimony, the testimony of survivors, and the particular clarity of Daniel Whitmore, who stood in front of the court and described in exact careful detail what he had found and what had been done to him for finding it, and whose voice did not shake once. The verdict was not immediate. These things never were. But when Ethan and Anna walked out of the courthouse into the Helena afternoon, after the final day of testimony, and the formal conclusion was still days away, the outcome was already evident to anyone who had been in that room. You could see it in the way the territorial officers moved. You could see it in the way Whitmore's lawyers spoke to each other in low-clipped voices. You could see it in the way James Hartley, who had been in the back of the courtroom for every session, stood when they came out and shook Ethan's hand, and then turned to Anna and said, "Miss Whitmore, your brother is extraordinary." "I know," she said. "You all are," Hartley said. He said it simply without ceremony, which was the only way a man like James Hartley said anything. Then he went back inside. Daniel was surrounded by 3 of the other survivors, who had testified, all of them talking at once. His face had a quality to it that Ethan hadn't seen before. Not the fragile relief of someone who had barely survived, but something more like the cautious, wondering expression of a young man who had done an extremely difficult thing and had come out the other side of it and was beginning slowly to understand that the thing he'd done had mattered. He caught Ethan's eye across the space between them. Ethan gave him the same nod he had given Anna in the Valley Pass. Daniel gave it back. The ride home from Helena took 2 days and was entirely different from any ride that had come before. Quieter. Not the quiet of tension or urgency, but the quiet of people who have finished something large and are carrying the feeling of it with them, each in their own way. Anna rode beside Ethan for most of it. They talked sometimes and were silent other times, and both states were equally easy, which was its own kind of information about what had developed between 2 people who had come to know each other under the most stripped-down possible circumstances, where there was no room for anything except who each of them actually was. At one point Anna said, "I want to write about it." He looked at her. Not a testimony, not a legal document, a real account. What actually happened, not just the facts but the people. Rose, the 2 brothers, Deacon, Thomas, and what it cost him to carry what he knew, Collins and her 7 months of records. She paused. People should know this happened, not as an abstraction, as a story about specific people who were specific people, and not just victims, and not just heroes, but just people, who were in a bad situation and either helped make it worse or helped make it better, and what those choices meant. "You know how to write," he said. Not a question. "Daniel got his talent for documentation from somewhere," she said. "Will you use your name?" he said. "Yes," she said. No hesitation. He nodded. "Good." The ranch came into view on the afternoon of the second day, and something happened when it did that Ethan had not expected. He had expected to feel the ordinary satisfaction of returning home after a long absence. He had not expected to feel what he actually felt, which was something more like recognition. The recognition not of a place he had built alone and returned to alone, but of a place that had become something larger than its original purpose. Margaret was on the porch. The hands were at their work, and spread across the property in the careful integration that Margaret had apparently organized with her characteristic efficiency were the people from the camp and the people from Harrow Creek, who had nowhere immediate to go, living and eating and existing in the space that had been 3 weeks ago a wealthy man's private achievement. It was loud in a way the ranch had never been. It was full in a way the ranch had never been. It was, Ethan thought, exactly what it should have been all along. Margaret came off the porch to meet him as he dismounted. She looked at his face and read it in the way she read everything quickly and accurately. "How'd it go?" she said. "Well," he said. "Good," she said. "Supper's in an hour. I've tripled everything because apparently that's our life now." She said this with the tone of someone who has absolutely no objection to the fact and is simply making an accurate observation. "Margaret," he said. She stopped and looked at him. "Thank you," he said, "for Helena, for all of this." He gestured at the ranch, at everything that had been done in the weeks since. "You didn't have to—" "Ethan," she said. He stopped. "I have worked for you for 7 years," she said. "In that time, I have watched you build something excellent and manage it very well and be fundamentally alone inside it." She paused. "This is better. That's all I have to say about it." And she turned and went back inside. He stood in the yard for a moment. Anna came to stand beside him. Daniel was already across the yard, being pulled into the company of 2 of the survivors, who had clearly connected with him during the Helena proceedings. He went willingly, his good arm being taken by a woman who had been in the camp for 6 months and whose family had been notified and was coming, and his voice when he spoke to her had that particular quality of someone who is moving toward something, instead of away from something, which was the clearest possible sign that he was healing. "He's going to be all right," Ethan said. "I know," Anna said. "He was always going to be all right. That's the thing about Daniel. He breaks in the right directions. The cracks let the light in instead of making the whole thing collapse." She looked out at the yard, at all the people in it. "This is remarkable," she said. "What you've made of this place." "What we've made," he said. She looked at him. "You came in through a locked door with a split lip and a list of names in your head," he said. "Don't subtract yourself from what happened here." She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her expression was doing that thing again. The thing where the controlled surface and the unguarded reality underneath were running close together, close enough that the gap between them was visible to someone who knew how to look. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask," he said. "When this is not over, because it's not the kind of thing that's ever fully over, but when it settles. When the people who need to leave have left, and the people who are staying have decided to stay. When Daniel is recovered, and Collins has her practice set up, and Hawk has taken whatever job he decides to take." She paused. "What do you want?" He looked at her steadily. "You already know the answer to that," he said. "I want you to say it," she said. I understood why. She was a woman who had been precise about language her entire life, who had held names and dates and numbers in her head with perfect accuracy, because she understood that precision was the difference between something that could be used and something that couldn't. She was not going to let something important between them exist only in the implied space around words that hadn't been said. "I want this," he said, clearly, simply. "The ranch what it's becoming, the work it's going to take to make it what it should be. Collins and Hawk and Thomas and Daniel when he decides what comes next." He held her gaze. "And you, here, in whatever form that takes, on whatever terms make sense for who you are. I'm not asking you to be something smaller than you are. I'm not asking you to fit into something that was already built." He paused. "I'm asking you to help build what comes next." She looked at him. The Montana sky behind her was the particular deep blue of a late summer afternoon, wide and clear all the way to the edges of the world. "Yes," she said. Not a no this time. "Yes." He nodded. Once. The same nod that had meant everything it needed to mean throughout this entire story, without ever requiring elaboration. She nodded back. They went inside. The conviction came 6 days later by official correspondence. Caleb Whitmore was found guilty on multiple counts, covering forced labor, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy, and bribery of territorial officials. The sentence was substantial. The appeal process would take time, as it always did, but the foundation of the case was too solid to be argued away by even the best lawyers in the territory. The officials who had taken Whitmore's money faced their own proceedings. Some cooperated immediately, some did not. The ones who did not found that the documentation Ethan had put in Hartley's hands was comprehensive enough to make cooperation eventually look considerably more attractive than resistance. The 12 people from Harrow Creek sent home were sent home within the month. Collins coordinated the logistics with the same medical record precision she applied to everything. Some families came to collect their people. Some people were strong enough to travel independently. One of the two brothers, whose mother had been looking for them for 14 months, asked to stay at the ranch for an additional month until he felt ready to face the reunion, because sometimes the things we most want are still too large to walk into when we're still too thin and too tired, and our hands still shake at unexpected moments. Ethan told him to take as long as he needed, and meant it. That brother's name was Sam. He stayed 3 months. When he left, he shook Ethan's hand and said, "I'm going to tell everyone I know what this place did." "Tell them what the people here did," Ethan said. "The place is just land." Sam looked around the ranch at the structures and the people and the particular quality of a place that had been built with real attention to what the people inside it needed. "It's more than land," he said. "But okay." He rode east. He told everyone he knew. Anna's account of what had happened was written over the course of 4 months. She wrote it in the evenings at the dining room table, long after the day's work was done and the ranch had gone quiet. She wrote it in the same precise hand she had used for the names and dates in the locked room where she had almost died, and the same hand she had used for the papers she had covered that first morning at Ethan's ranch, when she had organized everything she knew into something that could be used. She titled it simply, 43 Names. It was published first in the territorial press, and then in newspapers further east, and then further east than that, and then in the particular way that a true story told truly moves through the world further than anyone had expected. People read it and recognized pieces of it from their own territories, their own counties, their own family histories of someone who had gone looking for work and never come back. People read it and wrote letters to Anna, to Collins, to the territorial court, to newspapers, to anyone who seemed like they might be listening. Some of those letters contained names, new names, names of people still missing. Anna answered every one of them. She sat at the dining room table in the evenings, and she wrote back to every person who wrote to her, and she kept careful records of every name she received, and she began methodically and without drama the work of following up on each one. Ethan watched this happen and did not suggest that it was too much, or that she should rest, or that there would always be more names than she could address in a single lifetime. He understood without needing to say it that this was her purpose as clearly and completely as the ranch had become his, and that the two things were not competing but complementary in the way that two people's most essential selves sometimes turn out to be when the circumstances are right and both people are honest about who they are. Daniel recovered fully. His arm healed. His appetite came back. He spent 6 weeks at the ranch writing his own account of what he'd seen and what had happened, more granular and legally specific than Anna's intended, not for newspapers, but for archives, for the kind of record that historians find 40 years later and understand as evidence that something real occurred. He had always wanted to be a journalist. He became one. He stayed in the territory. He covered the follow-on proceedings from Whitmore's conviction. He covered the cases that came after, because the Whitmore case opened eyes and loosened tongues. And once a thing has been publicly named in the precise and irrefutable way that the Helena hearing named it, the similar things around it become harder to maintain in silence. Collins built her practice at the ranch, using the east wing that Ethan had converted for the purpose through the fall and winter. She practiced frontier medicine the way she had always practiced it, practically without ceremony, with the complete absence of sentiment about the difficulty of the work and the complete presence of care for the people the work served. She trained 2 young women from the settlement of Graywood who had wanted to learn medicine and had had no one to teach them. She wrote up the cases from the camp and from Harrow Creek in clinical form and sent them to medical journals east of the territory. Not all the journals published them. 2 did. The 2 that published them generated correspondence that Collins filed carefully and responded to on the same meticulous schedule she applied to everything. Thomas Reed stayed at the ranch through the winter. He worked hard the way he had always worked, and he did not talk much about the 18 months he had spent on Whitmore's operation, but he also did not pretend it hadn't happened, which was its own kind of honesty. He testified twice more in the follow-on proceedings, and each time he came home from the courthouse looking slightly lighter than he had before, as though the act of saying it out loud under oath was removing something from him piece by piece. In the spring, he came to Ethan and said he was thinking about moving on. There was work further, a legitimate freight operation that had reached out through the territory, and he wanted to, he used the word rebuild. Not start over. Rebuild. That's different, Ethan said. Yeah, Thomas said. I think it is. Ethan gave him a reference letter. He wrote it carefully and honestly, and said everything that was true about Thomas Reed, without softening the parts that were complicated, because a man who comes through something complicated and comes out still moving in the right direction deserves to have that said accurately rather than tidied up. Thomas read it and folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. Thank you, he said. Thank yourself, Ethan said. You came to the ranch when you didn't have to. Yeah, Thomas said. Well. He shook Ethan's hand, and he shook Anna's hand, and he rode south. Hawk stayed loose in the way. Hawk always stayed loose, appearing and disappearing on a schedule that made sense to him and which he never felt the need to explain. But he appeared consistently enough, and always at moments when his particular skills were useful enough, that Ethan stopped thinking of him as someone who passed through and started thinking of him as someone who had chosen this place as a base in the way that certain people who are most comfortable at the edges of things choose a center that they trust without ever quite planting themselves in it. Hawk never discussed this characterization when Ethan offered it once carefully. He also did not deny it, which from Hawk was essentially a declaration. The tree Anna planted was a cottonwood. She planted it in the second spring, near the eastern fence of the property, in a spot where the ground was good, and the light came evenly through most of the day. She planted it herself, the two of them doing the physical work of it together on a Saturday morning, when the rest of the ranch was quiet enough to allow for something that was not urgent and was simply significant. Ethan dug. She planted. They filled in the hole together and stood back and looked at it. It's going to be 40 years before that's any kind of shade, he said. I know, she said. That's the point. He looked at her. People think about the things you can see right now, she said. The immediate results, the closed case, and the conviction, and the names accounted for. The good thing that's visible. She looked at the small tree. But the thing that matters is what you plant for after you're gone. The shade you make for people you'll never meet. She paused. That's what my mother used to say. He stood beside her and looked at the small tree in the good ground with the even light. Tell me about her, he said. And Anna did. That was the thing about the story of Ethan Caldwell and Anna Whitmore, that the people who told it afterward most often got wrong or most often left out. They told it as a story about a wealthy cowboy who found a wounded woman and did something brave. They told it as a story about justice, about the defeat of a corrupt man, about the 43 names and the camp and the hearing in Helena. All of that was true, but the part that was most true, the part that the two of them knew most clearly from the inside of it, was simpler and harder to make into a story, and more important than all the dramatic turns and confrontations and moments of courage. It was the moment in the supply room when a broken woman said her name. It was the choice to stay made in the span of a single breath. It was two people who were both very good at being alone, learning slowly and without rushing it that they were better together. Not because they needed each other in the way of people who are incomplete without someone else, but because each of them brought something to the table that made the other person's best qualities more visible and more possible. Ethan had the resources and the reach and the 15 years of building something solid enough to bear weight. Anna had the precision and the purpose and the absolute refusal to treat any individual person as acceptable collateral damage. Together they had something that neither had alone. The ranch grew into what it became over years, not months. There were hard seasons and easy ones. There were setbacks, and there were small victories that felt large in the having of them. There were people who came through for a time and moved on, and people who came through and stayed, and the distinction was never treated as a hierarchy, because Ethan and Anna both understood that the point was the having been here, not the length of the stay. Margaret lived to 78, and was impossible every single day of it in the best possible sense. Colin's practice grew until she had 4 people working with her, and was the most respected medical presence in the Northern Territory, and was written about in the same journals that had once been uncertain about publishing her field reports. Daniel reported, "Hawk moved at the edges of things and appeared when it mattered, and never once failed to appear when it mattered. And on the frontier of Montana Territory, in a place that had been one man's private achievement and became something larger through a series of choices that started with the simplest possible action. A hand extended a door, forced open, a name given in the dark. Something grew that was harder to quantify than acreage, and more durable than money, and more important than reputation. People came to it from many directions and for many reasons. They came because they had heard about what happened. They came because they needed somewhere that knew what it was for. They came because in a territory where the strong survived by taking and the careful survived by looking away. Someone had done, neither had instead simply turned toward the person who needed turning toward, and everything that followed from that had followed from that. Years later, when people asked Anna what she thought survival meant, she said what she had always said. That survival was not staying alive, that any animal could do that. That real survival was finding something worth living for and building toward it, even in the times when you couldn't see the shape of what you were building. When they asked Ethan the same question, he looked at them with the steady, quiet face of a man who has thought about the answer long enough that the thinking and the living of it have become the same thing. And he said, "I think sometimes the most important thing a person can do is keep the door from staying locked. That's all. Everything else followed from that. Everything always does."